please let us know if you can hear us. Please, we really appreciate it. As much as we like talking to each other, we don't necessarily like talking
to each other
in an empty room.
Talking is just the worst. Hello all, and welcome to another exciting episode of Can You Hear Us Before We Start Lorebeards?
That really is our best sideshow.
It absolutely is. Let me just bring this up as we're doing our little chat. Also, Graham McNeil did another simply amazing job on Arcane. If you didn't know, Graham McNeil, Warhammer writer extraordinaire, had been writing for Arcane, is in their writing room, and by the gods did he nail it, but that's not what this show is about. I'm just calling out Graham because Graham rocks.
Very true, very true.
And all the writers, and let's just be fair, but Graham in particular rocks.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm totally not in a sad place because of that show. It's so good.
Spoilers.
All right, looks like y'all can see and hear us, which is great, awesome, excellent. That's what we like to hear.
Marvelous. As always, before we go, there's a few little things I'd like to say. Number one, if we do have any super chats coming in during the course of the stream, we will, of course, be answering them. If you have any questions concerning Golgfag ogres or anything connected to that, do feel free to ask. If they come up as super chats, we'll definitely answer them. If they come up in the chat, we'll probably miss them, but we might not, because occasionally we pull from there too. Any super chats that come in, though, we'll be taking them in batches, not just taking them as they appear, because we found that can be particularly disruptive to our overall chat.
No, we appreciate it.
We absolutely blooming do. Also, if you really want to say thanks to us all, do buy yourself a copy of Dark Deeds for Christmas, for any other festive holiday you might have, just for fun. This is the game of malicious minions. It's a good way to start any opening stream as we're waiting for you all to gather, because it's particularly humorous and, of course, illustrated by the marvelous Mark Gibbons, who, if you don't know Mark Gibbons' art, go type in Mark Gibbons into your search bar and find the following: all the coolest Warhammer art and art from Arcane. Well, not specifically Arcane, but most certainly the games that Arcane are attached to League of Legends, because he was one of the concept artists over on that as well. Mark is prolific. He is also the sole artist on this absolutely marvelous Upside Down game that you must purchase right now from Modiphius.com or .co.uk if you'd rather order from there. It is available now for hardly any bucks.
Please do. We would really, 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 really appreciate it.
Oh, by the gods, would we appreciate it, because we need to eat, and eating, I hear, is a really good thing for continuing to tap away at extra words or indeed doing streams.
It's so also thematic for today's episode, eating.
It totally is thematic for today. Yeah, 100%. So, yeah, do go buy Dark Deeds. I have done my sales pitch to open up the stream before we go. Oh, also, it comes from the Rookery too. I've got my own little Rookery mug here. Rookery, very nice. Very nice.
Flying by the seat of my pants here, trying to remember I forgot to announce that we were starting on socials, so I'm doing that while you're
going. Marvelous. A good thing to do. So we all know today our topic is Golgfag Maneater, infamous mercenary captain who has a history who's a little bit longer than many of you might realize. So I'm really looking forward to this episode. It's a little bit close to one of the reasons why I started with Warhammer to begin with. So that's one of the sweet little connections that I'll have to this character this week. But beyond that, as I said, if you do have any questions, do drop them into the chat.
Yep. This one, Golgfag's not only fun because he does have a, like Andy says, super long history within Warhammer Fantasy, but he's also very relevant as he is going to be showing up in the Total War verse here very, very soon. The Creative Assembly actually just announced that we'll be seeing the trailer for said DLC this Tuesday, which is very exciting. So you don't have
very
too much
exciting
indeed. For
that. Yeah, that's going to be fun. Marvelous. So will we cover our quick little super chats before we go?
Sure, and then we can hop right into it.
That sounds like a plan to me. Hey, Dynamite.
Idea for a Firebelly character, since the ogre seem to lack one, called Nurag Headsmoker. Basically, he's the herald of the Firebelly tribe and produces so much smoke from his facial orifices that he obscures friendly troops, though they are unaffected, and it causes enemies to cough, etc. Sure, I mean, that could work well. Yeah, I will say that being an ogre, I would probably expect him to have a fair amount of belching as a part of it, because you usually want to have like a level of like it would be not good to be at your dinner table. I find is usually good inspiration for ogres. If it would be unacceptable in polite society, then it's very ogre. Yeah, I think that worked great. Laughing God. Hello from the Laughing God household. I'm looking forward to this as I know little about this character. Well, you're about to learn a whole lot.
Chunk. Yeah, totally. Thanks, Laughing God. Appreciated.
Rumple Foreskin. Thanks. Great name.
Didn't need to be thinking about that one. Thanks for that.
Just wanted to thank you, glorious beardy bastards, for the many hours of entertainment. Well, thank you very much. And I really am curious what makes your fairy tale different from the typical one, but we're going to move on. The blog person. Good evening there, lads. Warhammer Sense of Scale can be a bit wonky sometimes. With that in mind, how large is the average ogre tribe / warband? Whew. Man, that'll change depending on who you ask.
Yeah. How long's a piece of string? So this is one of those things that is often left to individual writers. So you'll find that when one writer picks it up, say in one of the army lists, they will generally go, say, broad and say the tribes, the largest tribe, the smallest tribe, without going into any detail. That allows authors to then pitch them at whatever size they require as they move into telling the story. So they could have a tribe that might number only a few hundred up to several thousand if they wish to do so. The strict answer for this one is as big as the writer at hand requires. And I know that that's a crap answer because ultimately what we're trying to do is create a real world that very much we can all go, oh, I can imagine how that works. But that's the real answer. The real answer is as big as the writers want. However, that's unsatisfying. If we're actually looking at them as realistic entities within the world that they live, you're probably looking at, in terms of numbers, hundreds for the smaller clans, thousands for the bigger, and tens of thousands, if not more, for the very, very large ones, because they're often pitched as being this almost prolific species when they're not fighting against themselves, which is one of the reasons why the Cathayans got so upset about them, because there was just so many of them building up on their borders. And we're talking about an empire that numbers in multiple millions upon millions of folk, and they were worried about there being too many ogres. So that being the case, we are not looking at a small number even in the smallest of tribes. So I would suggest that tens of thousands for the big ones is a good starting point, but you will find that I'm sure some writers will happily go beyond that as and when their tales require.
Yeah, when it comes to like war bands that are roaming around, it's pretty rare to see ogres in like the hundreds. It can happen, but that's considered like a really bad situation. Like there's a story, I think it's like the Battle of 100 Cannons or something, where it's like two Empire armies ended up being in an advantageous place across a river, and they were going against an ogre tribe that numbered in the hundreds, and it was basically like, if those ogres were not stopped there, like, Aberlin was probably going to get wiped out. Like, it was that bad of a situation. So a lot of the ones that you tend to see in typical stories will usually have, like, dozens, if they're like a good-sized group, and if it's like a traveling squad of man-eaters, there'll maybe be like 20 to 50 of them.
Yeah, you often find that because of the nature of the way ogres work, they don't tell stories of ogres in the ogre kingdoms. They tell stories of the man-eaters who are elsewhere, which is particularly pertinent for this particular stream, meaning that the numbers that you encounter are rarely more than hundreds, although our character today is notorious for having war bands that number in very small numbers up to thousands as well. So you get the complete gamut with this particular character, which is super fun.
Luigi Super, hi there. Man-eater mercenaries are usually horrible to work with and difficult to maintain, but can a man-eater form a friendship with human allies? Yes. I would say yes. Absolutely.
Ogres are they are febrile creatures. That much is true. They are difficult to deal with, but if you know how to deal with them, you work at their level, and you ensure that they have no strong reason to betray you, then yes, you're probably going to be relatively fine. It's all about showing strength when it comes to ogres. If they feel like that they can take you and take what you own, they very likely might well do so. So it's all about ensuring that they don't think that you are strong enough to do that. Well, you're not weak enough, pardon me, to do that too. But friendship is a thing that ogres have. They've got long-standing friendships. In fact, if we talk about the character we're discussing today, he's got a very long-standing friendship with his primary, let's say, corporal or second-hand chief or whatever you want to call him. But his left-hand ogre, who is now missing half a leg, for reasons we will get into later, absolutely is a strong friend of his. And the very nature of ogres is their wanderlust drives them, and they assimilate with the cultures with which they meet. And that often means not just forming friendships, but forming fast, strong friendships that could last for a very long time. So absolutely no reason why this couldn't be the case, but be aware that individual ogres may find that sort of idea to be almost laughably ridiculous, and they would see other species as nothing more than something to eat.
Yeah, and there is a thing about that. Ogres tend to have a level of practicality that can be a little spooky from like a human perspective of, you know, like if a human comrade were to die, you'd be very sad, you'd bury them and stuff. Whereas if your human comrade dies, the ogre best friend may be like, well, just chow down on him and be like,
if anything, that's a
great
great
I love
if anything, that shows respect, because it shows that it's they are worthy of eating. They are worthy of taking into themselves and forming a part of that individual ogre, because ogres really only eat that which they think is worthy of their time, unless of course they're just hungry, they're eating things. But when it comes to eating their friends and eating their foes, it's the ones that are worthy of that. If not, they give it to their other ogre buddies because it's not worth their time. After all, the bigger the thing you've eaten, the bigger the ogre you are towards many a ogre thinking. So yeah, absolutely.
Let's see here. Jason, do ogres have any holidays? Thanksgiving, Thanksmawsing. If they ever let an American writer anywhere near the ogres, I feel like that would pop up very quickly. To my understanding, the big thing about ogres is I don't think they're very great at tracking a calendar, like keeping track of like time in that sense. They're very similar to like if you go talk about earlier when we talked about greenskins and stuff. Ogres tend to be very in the now focused and not really as worried about like future or past as much. A big thing about that is like how Greece's Goldtooth, until him, which was like in the last 100 years, ogres did not appreciate the value of gold because they were like, well, I can't eat this, so therefore it's worthless. Until Greece's like basically ran like a mandated education program across the ogre kingdoms. But that kind of goes to show that they're not really great with things that are not very tangible and immediately rewarding. So something like holidays, I don't think they would have any concept or care for.
No, when it comes to ogres, you tend to find that their great festivals, if you wish to use such a term, will be gathered around having killed something enormous. So they will be effectively worshipping the maw through their festival. They have killed this great thing that was in the mountains, they pull it down, and they have a great big feast, and that will come hand in hand with great pit fights and a massive bashing of drums and making all sort of belly rumbles and roars and a great deal of laughter and eating. Their festivities tend to be much more immediate, as was suggested there. Things that have happened, which means that they are now going to have a festival. So it's not so much that they have fixed holidays, it's that they have holidays whenever they do something fun and great as far as they're concerned. Their culture, whilst quite deep, is also quite simple in terms of how it articulates its worship, its festival events, and similar. So yes, they have holidays, but they're not fixed as we would understand them in a more human style.
Yeah, that being said, it wouldn't be surprising to find out like certain tribes, if they live near somewhere where like something happens in the Mountains of Mourne during certain equinoxes and stuff, they might make observations, but they probably would not have it down to like, oh, this event is coming up in 42 days. It would just kind of probably be kind of upon, they might have like a feeling in their gut, like a gut feeling that guides them that something's coming up, and that would probably be as far as it gets with them.
100%. Plus, I think they'd also, many of them would observe local festivities, because let's be honest, any excuse for a fight and any excuse for a big meal. So if they were in the Empire, for example, they would be following the local festivities and celebrating alongside everybody else. They wouldn't be doing that sort of standoffish thing where they go, oh no, that's human business. They'd be like, excellent, it's time for a party. Let's get our bellies out. Woohoo! And off they go.
Yeah, they are very American in that sense of, oh, someone else is celebrating a holiday? Well, we'll just add that another day.
They're the great assimilators.
When did Golgfag have the most to do with the fishmen? Which of his magic items did we get, though? Did he marry a fishman? If not, we summon Tumblr. So I will say, obviously the answer is no, but if you were going to have a special character who has canonically run into and had a dealing with the fishmen, Golgfag would be a very reliable pick to have that circumstance. Well, when we get into talking about where exactly he's been, he has been to places that I would go so far as to say is kind of impractical, but it says he's been there, so he's been there.
So I'm going to be discussing that a little bit in my intro as well, but loosely speaking, if you were looking for a character who's encountered fishmen and it hasn't been said yet, this is your character. He absolutely, if fishmen exist, has encountered them because he's 100% the type of character who would have done so. So rather amusingly, did he encounter them? Probably. Which of his magic items? Well, if anyone knows his Warhammer rules, he has a variety of magic items which he goes through one week to the next. As he gets his new one, gets that, gets captured.
Easy come, easy go.
Easy come, easy go. As he goes from item to item, it's very likely at some point he's had a large trident that very well may have come from the fishmen. Do I think that that's unlikely? No, not at all. For all that we obviously have a certain tongue-in-cheek when we're discussing fishmen, we know they do exist in Warhammer. Go check our stream about the fishmen if you want to know more about them. They are really a thing. So go check that one out if you're not sure what we're talking about.
Higgins, I'm coin from my favorite Warhammer men.
We thank you very much, Higgins. It's really appreciated.
Yeah, thank you. Ted Pereira, hey, Sotek and Andy, thanks for all the lore we get to enjoy regularly. Got to catch this one live. Is there anyone slash thing Golgfag or ogres and generals will not work for? So I would say, okay, you know how you come onto Lorebeards and y'all are like, hey, has this thing that has never happened ever had a chance of happening? We go, of course not, but this kind of falls under that of like, the only thing I could think of very reliably is that dragon ogres probably not, because there's a notable hatred between those species, but it's
not known for their hiring anyway.
Yeah, they're also not known for that. But at the same time, could it happen?
Golgfag.
It could, because it's Golgfag. I mean,
this is one of those rare instances where we have a proper bridge character. Golgfag Maneater is a character that can bridge into any other faction in Warhammer in a way that pretty much no one else can, almost. There's always another one. Whenever you try to say a limiting point, someone says, but what about this? And you're like, oh yeah, that thing too. But Golgfag is one of those rare characters who will work for and has worked for pretty much everybody. So that being the case, I'm hard pressed to think of any faction that Golgfag wouldn't, under the correct circumstances, be working for. And I'm giving it a go. And yeah, Dragon Ogres, but even then, I could see a Chaos Lord hiring them in at particular points, some Dragon Ogres being on the side, and it being nothing more than a point of consternation for them to perhaps turn sides halfway through. But I could see them actually getting dragged into that fight. I think I could build a story for pretty much anyone. So I think the answer is probably anything, yes.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. Golgfag is like, if you were ever building like a gigantic, stupid like compass of like chaos, order, good, evil, Golgfag would be smack in the middle.
Smack bang in the middle.
He just doesn't care. As long as he gets paid. Dino Man, am I correct in thinking Maneaters were named after Golgfag? So, what were they called before him? Also, it's slightly odd that the Maneaters would be the most common ogres hired by humans. I would think the humans would be apprehensive given their title. We will discuss that. We will discuss that as part of his history.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a core component of it. I'll discuss not only where the term came from and how it came about. I'll discuss it both in the game and kind of out of the game too, because they didn't quite marry as neatly as they later on were described as. But 100% that is the case. The Maneaters and the Mercenaries, being called Maneaters is named after Golgfag Maneaters.
Yeah. Magladroth, I've been looking forward to this one. Just out of curiosity, how long does the average ogre live? That's a great question.
Okay, so this has been answered a couple of times, actually, because I've written this particular piece of material. Ogres are one of those species that were ill-defined. So when it came to the roleplay game, there was a need to start defining it. And they ended up having a similar lifespan to halflings, because halflings and ogres come from very similar going out of time here, so to speak, rather than a very roleplay term there, out of time and discussing as what the writers are saying. They come from largely similar stock that were messed around with by the old ones back in the day. And they live for approximately similar lengths of time, although there is a general idea that the ogres being far bigger, much like elephants, can potentially live far longer if they should ever reach that point. So the typical old age setting in around about the 120s, around about there, 120s, pardon me. But some ogres can live up to their 200s or possibly even 300s. That was the general definition as it was given to me when I was writing it and in the first writings that I did. Having said that, though, because it's so ill-defined in the army list, you tend to find that whenever a new writer comes along, they look in the army list, don't find an answer, and come up with their own answer at the time. So be aware that if you are looking through the books, you are going to find contradictions in this one. But the core idea behind the scenes when I was writing was that they live about the same length of time as halflings as a standard, but because they're so big, if they manage to survive longer, they can live for longer, meaning that some ogres can reach very hoary old ages.
Yep. Tyrant, as someone who has listened to Sotek's 16-part ogre Q&A back in the day.
You had a 16-part ogre Q&A, did you?
Yeah,
Holy Camolians.
I need to bring back the series because it was people will ask questions and it won't be that bad. It got bad. So I need to get back on that. I've been sitting on the Empire one for like 2 years at this point. But yes, Tyrant, yeah, should be a good time. Watchdog 3079, evening lads, but curious what your thoughts are on the PC options for ogres as they exist. Oh, player character options.
I have opinions. So I have opinions in this one because I first added ogres to Warhammer Fantasy Roleplaying, the second edition of the game. I wrote all the material for it. And it was deeply controversial at the time because there was this general idea that ogres could not be PCs because the Ogre Kingdom's army list had just come out and they had completely changed what ogres were in Warhammer. And I was very much the opinion that the army list allowed for ogre PCs. The general Warhammer crowd were not. So I just did what I like to do and showed them they were wrong and sat down, wrote the entire thing and showed how ogres were very much a PC choice. When we come to the 4th edition of the game, that's the most recent one, my rules for 2nd edition were pretty much copied and pasted down into 4th edition. Unfortunately, that meant because the rules were a bit different in 4th edition, they could have made a couple of amendments to make them a bit more balanced that I don't think did happen with the version for 4th edition, but I still think they make great PCs. I don't think they necessarily make great PCs with the rules as they stand. There's a couple of things I'd like to see changed there to make them work really well as a party component in a way that doesn't completely dominate or ruin the game. But 100%, I think they make great PC options.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I've played with an ogre PC as like a fellow player, and I've also GM'd for an ogre, and it works really well. But you need to have a GM that understands what they're doing. Like you need to have like a not first-time GM to really make an ogre work well. Yeah. Because there's a lot of things the GM kind of has to do behind the scenes, and like when they're describing the world around you and stuff, that makes the ogre have his challenges outside of the regular PCs, because when it comes to like raw combat, he's going to be scary as hell.
He's going to dominate. Yeah.
Yeah. So a GM has to be really smart in like dealing with the other issues. But between the 4th edition, I think it's Archives of the Empire Volume 2.
I think.
Possibly. Yes. Yeah. And yeah, it is. It's volumes 2. And then also the new Tribes and Tribulations book also added more rules for ogres. It's pretty good. The careers are nice. They have a nice diversity of careers now.
Yeah, so absolutely PCs, although I would put out one general word of warning. They don't make good PCs for some groups. And I'll just add this one in general, and that's that because they are ranging, depending on which version of ogres you go with, from 9 to 12 foot tall, they're freaking enormous. They don't fit into most stories. They can't go into the local inn because there's no space to get through the door. They can't go and speak to the local fence or drop down to the local, I don't know, bar. It's just they don't fit in. And that being the case, unless it's large warehouse-like buildings, the vast majority of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay stories are told within the confines of cities and tunnels and going down dungeons. And most of those stories are terrible for ogres because they're just too big. So that generally means that you need to, if you're a GM and you want to incorporate them, either find things for the ogres to do that lie outside of that, or alternatively, you need to do a little bit of massaging to ensure that the ogre can take part in those stories.
Yeah, like it's just a very brief example. Like when we were doing it, I had a chat with one of my players of like, you're going to run into situations where like the party's going to go into a building and you're going to have to find other stuff to do because you will physically not fit. So like we're going to, and there was a time they were running away from like a bunch of undead in the hallway, and he was like literally breaking the hallway and getting stuck because he's a really big guy. So there's challenges.
Yeah, and they can be potentially boring to play because there might be a section that's entirely based on conversation. Ogres are not the most, let's say, intelligent or patient of species, meaning that they sometimes make poor characters for investigative stories. You very much need to make sure that the story that the ogre is involved in, pardon me, matches that character, or the player might get bored, and that is the death of a good session. So you've got to make sure that the character matches the type of adventures that you play.
Yep. All right. Where was I lost my spot. There we go. Corin, going to Japan. Do you think ogres would appreciate sushi as an artistic food?
No, I mean, they'd appreciate tons of fish and just shoving it in them. But
yeah, they wouldn't care for the artistry. Yeah, no.
The artistry is very much not their cup of tea.
It'd be like, the way I would put it is, imagine you go to a man who is just left a desert and he's practically dying of thirst, and you go like, this is like the most purified, beautiful water from the summits of Mount Everest, and expect him to appreciate it. And he's just, no, he doesn't. He's just gonna, like, go crazy. That's how ogres are with all food, all the time.
Let me just pull back Tiny Man's comment because you skipped by that one quickly.
Oh, whoops. That means I skipped a couple things. But okay, I see where I am. All right. Now I'm imagining an ogre's human friend dying and the ogre crying while eating them, like Homer did with a lobster. That is exactly what it would probably look like, to be honest.
I could see some ogres doing that. Some wouldn't at all, because death is just a component of life. They don't have necessarily the same emotional attachment to things that we as humans do. They also don't have the same depth of abstract thought, as in the consideration of what they'll be missing out on. So the concept of grief is not high on most ogres' list of primary concerns. Sure, they might, grieve a bit, but that requires some long-term empathy, something ogres are not exactly renowned for. But that doesn't mean that in the moment they won't necessarily be upset.
Yeah. Lurgard Lantern Angry Fist from the 4th edition Hirelings book is an example of an ogre who made a friend that ate their body out of respect. Hey, well, there you go.
There you go.
From the Hirelings book. Yeah, the Hirelings book is pretty fun. Bloke Person, thank you very much for that. Yeah, it's got a bunch of fun, like, NPCs you can have join your party and stuff. Dylan, what is we did answer this earlier with average lifespans and stuff. Ricky Chapman, we met Golgfag in a TTRPG game. He was going to eat us, but we kissed ass enough that he agreed to let us go if we beat him in an eating contest, and we did better than you'd expect. He found it very funny, so he only ate a PC's arm instead of everyone. Well, it sounds like your GM handled that very, very well.
I approve.
I like that y'all got away, but there was a price. That's your GM handled that very well. That's good. I like that a lot. Yeah. I think it's easy for GMs to kind of pull their punches too much in a lot of situations. That's genuinely very good and funny. Hutchins, great battle, feast. New tyrant, feast. Child chosen by a butcher, feast. Noblar died in a funny way, feast. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Amadeus, is there a link between the wanderlust of the ogres and the wanderlust that Ulgu inspires in the Grey Wizards? If not officially, do you have an interpretation for it?
Almost certainly, yes. There is the core concept of each of the winds of magic and how they influence everything in the Warhammer world is a basic building block of how that world works. And you tend to find that there is no such thing as coincidences. So the general answer to this would almost certainly be yes, they have a significant amount of the grey wind attached around them for one reason or another. You could make up your own reasons. I have mine that are 100% not official. When I was down for writing the Ogre material for 4th edition, I was going to make it at that point a canon view, because I was going to actually incorporate it and explain exactly how it worked. But that didn't happen because I left the job just as the Ogre stuff was going through production. I commissioned it. I'd got a writer to make it. I said, here's what I've written before. You can use whatever you want. And boy, did they. He just copy-pasted it. I didn't expect that. I expected them to use it as inspiration, not
They're like, well, you said it, so.
Yeah, pretty much. So copy-paste it is then. If you're going to do that, at least give me a writing credit. Yeah, that would have been nice. But when it comes to the ogres, I think that definitely it is not a coincidence, because you tend to find that these things aren't. The maw and exactly what it is not completely separate to the winds of chaos that it pretty much permeate everything in the world. So tying it all together with a neat bow is not necessarily a bad idea, but I'm sure some writers would much prefer to keep it separate.
That's right. Saurus Blood, in the process of painting 20 foot knights right now for a narrative event next Sunday. When ogres eat a knight, do they use can openers? No. A lot of ogres can actually just eat metal perfectly fine. But there is more than you would think quotes that are kind of hidden throughout ogre stories and some Bretonnian stories that talk about interactions between ogres and knights, and how ogres will often literally refer to them like almost being
right. I'll give you the exact quotation. It's literally from Golgfag Maneater, who refers to knights as tinned food. So yeah, he refers
that's what
to
it is. That's right. Yeah, tinned food.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's from Golgfag Maneater himself. That's the 8th edition of the army lists, where that one's dropped as a fun little detail, because he was against Bretonnian knights, as I recall, and referred to them as tinned food, and it kind of stuck amongst all the man-eaters.
Yeah, which is great. I mean, that's perfect, and horrific to imagine them just cracking them open to get at the good parts.
Yeah, but to reinforce what Sotek said, ogres not only can eat metal, they do eat metal. Indeed, they also eat stones. Much like many species in the real world will consume certain things to help their digestion, ogres eat stones to help the churn in their many stomachs. And the stones sit in there. And whenever you pass an ogre, you hear them, this constant churn of their guts, as all the things that they've consumed are rolling around inside. In the same way that for us and humans, you get a little when they're hungry. For ogres, who are constantly hungry, you have that constant churning, grinding sound coming from them, making them a much more noisy species than you might realize, and not especially good at stealth.
Yes, which makes the stealth ogre particularly hilarious when that model came out. I love him so much. Vault Boy 1300.
Classic ogre though.
Yeah, your Q&As are some of my favorite content I rewatch often. First one I watched, Ogre's Q&A episode 4. Well, okay, I get it. Yes, give us the empire. All right, fine. Jesus, wow, I get it. Thank you. Calm down, peanut gallery. Brent DeLiu. Hi, Lorebeards. Do you guys have a resource you recommend to learn more about the college patriarchs? I'm interested in learning more about the likes of Hexenson or Grunfeld. Go watch Lawhammer.
Yeah, fair. Go watch our stream because they all pop up at some point. So for these, your best bet is any of the magic books for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay First Edition was where you got the first deep dive into the Patriarchs. They had their Realms of Magic book there. Second Edition did, with its Realms of Sorcery, much the same, and that's where you get probably your best write-ups for Hexenson and Grunfeld, because they go into some detail there. Fourth Edition's got its Winds of Magic book as well, which adds yet more extra details, but not that much more, actually. So I'd probably say Second Edition will give you your best write-up on those. Tochter, Grunfeld in particular, and Viggo Hexenson are each given a couple of paragraphs each inside that book.
Yeah, I would heavily recommend Realms of Sorcery. One of my big disappointments with Winds of Magic 4th Edition was they didn't focus on the patriarchs very much. They really
didn't, and they should have, because they are core characters for the colleges, and it's a bit of a shame they didn't. So I would probably say Second Edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay.
Spice, no more fitting stream to pay tithes and tributes on. Thank you both for countless hours of entertainment. Your insights and theory crafting is unparalleled. You rock. Well, we appreciate that, Spice. Thank you so much.
You rock in return, Spice. You kick ass.
Dynaman, random question, but one-on-one, Minotaur versus an ogre bull, who would win?
Whichever one's better at fighting. And it's a difficult call.
Yeah, funny enough, I would say, honestly, whichever one of them lands the charge better would probably get the upper hand. Because they're both devastating on a charge, but whichever one ate it worse would probably go down faster.
It would be bloody.
Yeah, that would be a horrific fight to witness.
Yeah, it would be bloody.
Laughing God, what things in the halfling/ogre dynamic are brought out within each other when they are together and cooperating?
Put loosely, they have an affinity for each other. Now, that in no way means that your average ogre won't be eating your average halfling, because halflings are tasty. They're fine. They're fine bits of meat and very chubby bones. It's absolutely brilliant. They're good to eat. But broadly speaking, halflings and ogres share a commonality. That's the loosest way of putting it. And this has popped up more than once in more than one book. Indeed, it was first introduced as an idea back in 2005 on Games Workshop's website when they were discussing the a foundation for what they were building for the new Ogre Kingdom's army, and how the halflings were going to be a core component, but later on that became the Noblars. And that slowly but surely filtered into multiple books and then eventually the role-playing games. Loosely speaking, that means that when it comes to ogre mercenaries or ogre workforces in the Empire, you tend to find that it's halflings that are the ones that are doing the talking for them. You'll find that down in the Moot, there is a significant population of ogres down there because they kind of work together really well. You'll find that any halflings that move around and represent on behalf of ogres or two ogres are often more likely to be successful than humans. Basically, if you want to just run it down into its simplest aspect, they get a bonus for communicating with them. They tend to work well with each other.
Yeah, the biggest way that I've seen it expressed in like lots of different Black libraries and stuff, novels and such, is that halflings tend to have a better innate understanding of how to communicate with an ogre, of like not falling into kind of the human trap of using like too many words or words the ogre or concepts the ogre's not going to understand, stuff like that. Halflings seem to have a better innate kind of vibe for what the ogre's going to understand.
And there's also just the basic societal links that they have. If you take a look at, for example, how ogres deal with others, they often look at an individual, and the bigger they are, the more respect they tend to give them. They don't like skinny elves. They look at humans and they think they're super scrawny. Indeed, the common nickname for them is slim. And then we look at a halfling and they're podgy little round boys. And they look at those and they go, yeah, okay, this is something I get. They understand what's important in life, because ogres understand the more you eat, the bigger you get, the more respect you deserve amongst your peers. That's how ogre society works. They look at halflings and they go, they deserve respect, even though they're tiny. We kind of love them like tiny little brothers. Look at them go with their pudgy little bodies. Look how big that one is. Ho, ho, ho. Ha, ha, ha. They get on with them. It's culturally, they work, where culturally humans don't. And they cover themselves in ways that they don't like. And they just talk too much, like I do. So, broadly speaking, halflings and ogres get on.
Okay, last one, and then we got to get going on some other stuff. Man, wait, Golgfag referring to knights as tin food implies that A, tin food exists in Warhammer, and B, Golgfag knows what it is. Who do you think is most likely to have tin food? Gnome, dwarves, or chaos dwarfs?
I don't think that tin food necessarily exists in the Warhammer. It's nothing more than a little joke. As I recall, it's literally just their slang for knights that was dropped in as a little.
I think he just goes 10. And there's food in it.
Yeah. That's the word for metal, right? Tin, and it's like steeled food. Except in this case, it's tin food.
Yeah, definitely more of a real world joke. But
absolutely.
All right, we've got an intro to get into, so let's get into it.
Okay, so Golgfag Maneater. Golgfag. Right, where do we begin? So Golgfag is a really, really old Warhammer character. Now, I don't mean in terms of physical age. He's only been kicking around the Warhammer world in terms of actually impacting it for a good 80, 90, maybe 100 years. He's a relatively old ogre, well experienced, very good at his job. But Golgfag Maneater, or as he was originally just pitched, Golgfag, was first introduced to Warhammer in the first edition of Warhammer. Warhammer Fantasy Battle, first edition, in the Forces of Fantasy, in the very first ever Regiments of Renown. You found a full one-page spread about Golgfag. And Golgfag all the way back there, I don't actually sadly have my copy of first edition here. It's in storage. So I had to go to my digital one, which I got from Games Workshop. Thank you very much, Games Workshop, when I was working for them. His regiment of mercenary ogres, as they were pitched back then, way back in 1983 for first edition. So that's a long time ago. There are very few characters that have existed from there all the way into 8th edition, and I do mean very few. Grom, he wasn't originally Grom the Paunch, he was just Grom the Goblin. Joseph Bugman, he was back then, and Golgfag. Now Golgfag, as he was back there, is pretty much exactly the same as he is later, just older. Old school. And by that I mean, instead of being ogre kingdoms, he's just what ogres were originally in Warhammer, which is the classic fantasy staple for an ogre, i.e. someone who's about twice the height of a human, big huge tusky fangs, and a mercenary, a bit thick, with an almost unintelligible language that they speak in, working for anyone. And the core story that you learn of Golgfag's regiment of mercenary ogres is that they were working for goblins, betrayed the goblins, working with dwarves. It was the whole goblin dwarf betrayal thing. This becomes the core story of Golgfag later on. They just copy, paste it down, but they replace goblins. They replaced goblins with orcs. And you'll find that this is a core component of Warhammer's development, where in the original Warhammer, goblins were a serious force. The dwarves were not at war with greenskins as a whole in the original version of Warhammer. It was the Goblin Wars. And goblins in particular were the great threat against the dwarves. That changes to greenskins as a whole, and then sort of just turns into orcs in later editions of Warhammer as it moves on. But initially, it's goblins. One other interesting fact is that they are lumped in with the early version of the ogre's tribal patterns. He was, at this point, a chieftain, and he came from the frozen north, because this is long before we have the Warhammer world as we understand it today. First edition Warhammer pretty much had the north, the south, the east, and the west, Lustria over there, and chaos is bad, right? Yeah, let's go. Woo! It didn't have a great defined world. That would come as the editions came out. The first edition of the game was very simple with its world building, but we had ourselves Golgfag from the frozen north, who was a chieftain who led mercenaries. He was a regiment of renown, which means he could go in any army, and he got his own miniature, and I painted that miniature when I was 10. So I would just like to rest in this moment and go, I have painted the original Golgfag. Indeed, I bought the whole Golgfag mercenaries. I didn't have many. I think I had 6 of them back then. It wasn't exactly a great mercenary warband, 6 ogres. But it had a drummer, as I recall, the standard bearer, my Golgfag at the front, and his chieftain beside him. It was great. So this is all the way back in the 80s when I was but a lad, to give you an idea of just how old this character is. Now, Golgfag pretty much slips into the background as we move into 2nd edition, as we then move into 3rd edition of Warhammer. The ogres are always there as mercenary components to other armies. You tend to find there was no great ogre army. But when we moved into 4th edition, that almost changed. Now, we've discussed the 4th edition of Warhammer multiple times, because the 4th edition of Warhammer changed Warhammer's background into the Warhammer world as we know it today. And during that edition, there was at one point going to be an ogre troll type army getting built. I've read it. This is a rare thing for me to say. I've read it because I know the writer of it. It never got used because he left the studio not long after, and he kept it. And I've read it, and that was going to be an army list. It was written at the same time, about the same time as the Empire army list, and it almost became a thing. And indeed, Golgfag was in there. Golgfag was a core character even at that point, because he was really about the only proper named ogre that was kicking around. So using that plus the ones from the roleplay game were pretty much all that they had to draw upon for building their armies. Warhammer, however, went in a slightly different direction. And through the course of 4th edition into 5th edition, the ogres were relegated to mercenaries, working with their other armies. Chaos ogres, for example, or the ogres in the 4th edition army list of the Empire. So the Empire could take ogres in their army list, for example. So you find the ogres were always there, but they just didn't really have anybody doing anything for them. And whenever someone mentioned ogres, you often found that the word Golgfag would be dropped somewhere. So a Citadel Journal might mention it here, or a little mention of story over there. But that was about it. It wasn't until we got the complete redesign of Warhammer, where they moved from the hero hammer of 4th and 5th edition, repitched everything, rebalanced everything, and moved into 6th edition, that we got the return of Golgfag. But only slightly. So we're now talking, we're moving forward in time fast here to 2005. So we have had, by this point, 20 years of ogres being the classic stereotype of a fantasy ogre. Big, tall, muscle-bound, thick idiot who works for other people. If you want to know what they look like, just take a look at any of the old Blood Bowl ogres, because they were classic Warhammer ogres. Look at any of the old Warhammer ogre miniatures, all the metal miniatures. They're just big blokes who stand at about 9 foot tall on average, and they just tend to be big humanoids with tusky things, and they didn't have much in the way of character or description beyond they're big, they're a bit stupid, they call people slim and tend to laugh at them in any of the stories where they were mentioned. Then Ogre Kingdoms came, and they completely changed everything. They were rewritten from the ground up, and it caused enormous controversy in the Warhammer, let's say, fan base at the time, because we had ourselves 20 years of established ogres and what they were. Ogres were a species that were found across the old world, across the Warhammer world, and many of them had tribes inside the World's Edge Mountains, up into the Chaos Wastes up in the north. Chaos Ogres were a thing. Ogres very much were very grounded into what Warhammer was. Then the Warhammer game in 6th edition said, you know everything you know about ogres? Wrong. Completely wrong. Ogres come from the mountains of Morn. Ogres have big bellies. Ogres eat all the time. Ogres' core culture is eating. Ogres worship the Maw. Ogres have their own gods. Ogres have got their own types of magic. They were rewritten from the ground up. And obviously, whenever change comes, people get upset. A huge chunk of the Warhammer crowd, those who were existing players, particularly of the role-playing game, kind of got up in arms. And they were like, how could you change my ogres like this? I've got ogre characters, they're completely different. Not realizing that they could work hand in hand with the horrific ogres that had just been built. Because inside the concept of this was the Maneater. The Maneater was written into the 6th edition. The Maneaters were these ogres who had this great wanderlust, and they moved from place to place to place to place, working within the local communities, working to fit in with their customs because of the nature of how Maneaters worked. They were ultimately the wandering mercenary that tended to fit in with whatever the local culture was, allowing all the ogres that everybody knew to still kind of exist. You just had to reshape them slightly, widen them a bit at the belly, make their heads a little bit more like Jabba the Hutt. There was, through this edition, particularly 6, some beautiful art put into place by, I think it was Karl Kopinski, as I recall, and they were pitched in this edition as quite different in culture. Our ogres had moved from being just your generic fantasy ogre guy into almost being Mongol equivalents. They were given often thin moustaches, long moustaches, Mongol-style attire, clothing, and weaponry. This, however, will change in later editions when they start bleeding that away. But they were given a far more Eastern-facing look. But behind all of that came their man-eaters. And the man-eaters were not strictly speaking attached to, but were definitely hinted at with one little extra bit, which was in the 6th edition of the armor list underneath there. I think it was Guts of Legend. I'm going to have to actually check it up to make sure I'm right.
Yeah, I believe that's right. Yeah.
Guts of Legend, where Golgfag Maneater, Mercenary Captain, was mentioned. He wasn't given stats, but Golgfag had been resurrected, and the Mercenary Captain, as he was put down there, is basically the most successful ogre mercenary of all time. That's how they pitched it in 6th edition. This guy was top tier ogre mercenary. And they do a little bit about how he's fearsome, he's built a reputation, how he got the name Maneater. We'll get into that when we discuss later. How he's got a network of scars, how he's been working for about the last 60 years, but he's no longer a chieftain. He's more of a wandering, very successful mercenary, and it's captain. It's not general. He's not someone who leads the forces. He's someone who gets hired in to work underneath somebody else. And that's pretty much where he gets left off. Lovely. And I was delighted because I like Golgfag. I painted him back in the day, and I painted up an ogre to be my new Golgfag at about 2005, 2006, I think I did it. And he looked nothing like the miniature that came later, which was significantly more impressive than my shitty one that I converted. But I loved Golgfag, so I made a new one. But he would be given the new name Maneater, and a lot of people are saying, well, does that mean he is, a Maneater? Well, of course he is. He's an ogre mercenary. He's just been named that, but he's called Maneater for his own little personal reasons. It wasn't until 8th edition, when they rewrote the ogres again, not more than, it must be about 6 years later, 2011, I think, when the 8th edition army list came out, that we get a full breakdown of Golgfag Maneater as a character in the game. It only took them 30 years from 1st edition to 8th edition to bring him back into the game again. And in 8th edition, by the gods, was he effective, but they completely rebuilt him again. And they have moved him from being simply an effective mercenary captain to being, the most effective mercenary captain, to the mercenary captain that has done everything. And I do mean everything. We're going to get on to this. Golgfag Maneater has been there and bought the t-shirt and then eaten it. No matter where you might think Golgfag may have gone, he pretty much has. In fact, he becomes so successful as a mercenary that all the mercenary ogres out there realize that they will get more work if they refer to themselves as Maneaters. So come 2518, so we're talking only about 10 years before the whole world blows up. But come 2518, really late in the day, all mercenary ogres around the world have reached a point where they start referring to themselves as Maneaters. And they're called Maneaters because of Golgfag. It's not the other way around. It's not because he became a Maneater and he was famous. No. Quite the opposite. Golgfag Maneater became so famous that anyone out there hiring ogres wanted to hire Golgfag's Maneaters. That being the case, other ogres, who most certainly were not Golgfag Maneaters, went, yeah, I'm Golgfag Maneater. Indeed, this became such a thing that many of the stories attributed to Golgfag Maneater may not be Golgfag Maneater, because multiple ogres across the Warhammer world started referring to themselves as Golgfag because it got them work. So you'll find that come the last 8th edition version of our version of Golgfag, we have ourselves the true Golgfag Maneater, who is the most successful mercenary ogre captain in the Warhammer world during the last end times. He is quite simply peak ogre. There are few who could even claim to be as successful as him. He has no desire to become a great chieftain of the ogres because he is, at his heart, filled with the wanderlust that takes him from one part of the world to the next. And he has been so successful that all of the ogres, over the course of the 60 years through which he works, have started referring to themselves as Maneaters because they are desperate to attach themselves to his name and get his work. Indeed, many of the more successful ogre captains call themselves Golgfag Maneater purely because that means that they will get work. And the others will go, oh, you're Golgfag, I'll hire you in. Which means come the end times, we have multiple Golgfag Maneaters, all of whom are claiming the title, only one of whom actually is Golgfag. So that's my brief intro to Golgfag. I haven't painted the most recent edition miniature of him, which is a bit sad. I wish I had. But Golgfag, as you probably all know, is about to be ported into Total War Warhammer as well. How much that pleases me is beyond anything I can actually say because I love the character. So he's been added in with a whole ton of new mechanics as well, which I think is going to speak to, well, I think to the game as a whole as well, having a little read about what he can do.
Yeah,
so,
should be a really good time.
Yeah, should be a really good time. That's my intro to Golgfag.
Excellent.
What do you think, Sotek? Anything you would add to that?
The only thing I would add, did you bring up his appearance in the, was it the 5th edition Dogs of War book or 6th edition?
God damn it, I missed one. No, I didn't. That's 5th edition. Gods of War. There's always something that slips through the net.
Yeah, which, for those that are aware, it was kind of like the Talayan army book, but like half the book was just Regiments of Renown, and Golgfag does make an appearance in it. I think he has a story about him pissing off Lorenzo Lupo quite a bit, because he was working in Talaya for a while. But we'll talk about that as we get into his history and stuff. But first, we're gonna get caught up with super chats and all that jazz. So we left off here. Darius Rose, if Greasus met with the Maneater, would he be a Skittle starstruck considering how famous he is, like Trump with Hogan at the RNC? What about Bragg and Scragg as well? So there is some snippets about a little bit of the relationship between the Goldtooth tribe and Golgfag. And the big thing about it is that Golgfag is a legend among the ogres, and Maneaters in particular, when they come back to the Mountains of Morn, there's a talk about ogres really enjoy hearing like the stories of far off places. But Greasus has a bit of a unique relationship that would probably sour his relationship with Golgfag pretty quickly, which is that Greasus genuinely sees himself as the high king of the ogres. And a lot of ogres don't really ascribe to that theory. Now, they don't say that anywhere near him because he will beat them and eat them alive if they try and challenge him on the thing. So everyone goes, oh yeah, you're the boss, right? You know, you're the over tyrant. But ogres, generally speaking, historically don't actually like having over tyrants. Like there wasn't one, I think, for like a good couple hundred years before Greasus took over. Because they have issues with authority in a lot of cases. So I don't actually think a relationship between Greasus and Golgfag would be that great, because Greasus would want Golgfag to work for him, and I don't think Golgfag would really want to deal with Greasus outside of taking his money. And I imagine they would probably work together a couple of times, and then Golgfag would do what he inevitably does and betray Greasus, and that relationship would be soured permanently.
Yeah, pretty much.
Because Greasus is not a forgiving ogre.
Can't believe I missed out Dogs of War. It was in my head. I just skipped by it. Just so we've got it very briefly covered, because I did skip it. 5th edition, Dogs of War. So that's the 5th edition of the game. So we're still in Hero Hammer. The very, very briefly, Golgfag's ogres could be increased. He's not Golgfag Maneater by this point. He doesn't become Golgfag Maneater until 6th edition. He's Golgfag's Mercenary ogres, and Golgfag's Mercenary ogres introduced a second in command in their scaff. It includes a whole bunch of fun little details about the battle cries and war cries, which really funnily don't match the 1st edition. I'm going to call out one because it really amuses me. So their battle cry is Gru Arg Arg Wa, which according to 5th edition translates as, very basically from the ogre language from birth, feed me now. But if you go back to 1st edition, this is what it actually translates. Exactly the same battle cry, Gru Arg Arg Awa, which experts claim to recognize, I'm quoting this one, that some elements offer the following broken translation, if we believe it. Remove yourselves from your current physical location. Failure to comply with our request would result in severe physical discomfort of a kind which would seriously curtail your social life. As in, we're going to pull your bits off. Which is quite a fun little detail as well. So Nigel Stillman, I'm pretty sure it's Nigel Stillman who wrote the Dogs of War book.
That's such an elaborate translation.
It's really good. Funny. He copy-pasted the basic war cry, but simplified it down to just feed me now, rather than I'm going to pull off your bits. But beyond that, the Golgfag, as he's described in 1st edition, is pretty much just repeated into 5th edition. So he's always been one of those characters who's popped up again and again. And it isn't until 6th edition that it becomes a Maneater, because it's in 6th edition that they create the concept of the Maneater, which is basically Golgfag.
Yeah, and Darius answered the last two when it comes to like how would he handle like Bragg the Gutsman and Scrag. Bragg the Gutsman, I imagine that he would find him a bit unsettling, like all ogres do, because Bragg is specifically designed to be an ogre that makes other ogres uncomfortable. Because the way he kills is very agonizing and like over the top from an ogre perspective, where people don't like being around him. So that would probably carry over. And then Scrag, you probably have like begrudging respect. I mean, he is, the maw that walks, and he really does talk the talk and walk the walk. He'd probably want to eat in a feast that Scrag hosts, and then he'd probably be like, well, that was novel, and then move on.
Yeah. I think one of the great things about Golgfag is he will work with anyone.
Yeah.
I think that's what it boils down to. And in every edition that he's been presented, he has either been described as the mercenary captain who works for everyone, or his rules literally say you can include him in any army. For example, the 5th edition one, which quite literally says any army can hire Golgfag's ogres.
Yep. Darius, again, thank you. If I met a Maneater in a bar, what would their temperament be like? Are they fun barmaids? It would depend on how recently they've been fed and how drunk they are, probably.
Maneaters are one of those great unknowns, because it comes down to the individual. The successful Maneaters are the ones that assimilate the local culture and fit in. The unsuccessful ones are the ones that don't and get killed because they break local laws. So you tend to find that through the basic, it's almost Darwinian when it comes to Maneaters, as in the ones that actually manage to do the fitting in thing well, they're going to be fine. And they are going to move through various communities with relative ease, where the ones that don't fit in, break laws, eat the local cows when they really shouldn't do. I just found it wandering around. Nom, nom, nom. They were mine. And as all the farmers come out with pitchforks or whatever it may be, those who break the laws get caught, get captured, or just end up getting surrounded by others and having to kill their way out of the place. They're the ones that are going to be less successful. So the ones that actually reach the bar, I would argue, would actually be relatively decent. I'm not saying good, but in the greater scheme of things, you could probably have a drink with that Maneater, because they have reached the point where they've arrived at a bar and they haven't done anything else, which means they have survived 30, 40, 50, 60 other events that have led up to this bar. which means that they are the type of ogre that does fit in. So I would say, yeah, probably be okay.
Yeah,
sure.
I would 100% agree. Like if the ogre has enough wherewithal in the culture that he's arrived at a bar and is sitting somewhere in the bar peacefully drinking, is probably a reasonable person to chat to.
Yeah, in the great scheme of ogres, it could be worse.
Yeah. Donovan, I'm Golgfag Maneater, and so's my wife. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
Exactly.
Spartacus. Yeah, quite.
Sean Schultz, of the new 3 legendary lords of the DLC, would Golgfag win? What, he's up against Gorbad, Ironclaw, and Skulltaker? But all 3 of those are very nasty combatants. I will say, I feel like Golgfag would be the most likely to get away alive. He would be the least likely to die. I would feel comfortable putting it that way. I don't know if he'd win, but he'd survive.
Yeah, Golgfag is a survivor. I mean, his stats, if you just look at his bare stats, regardless of which edition you go with, and if we go with the Warhammer First Edition, his toughness is D, because we don't even have numbers in First Edition. But if you go by his basic stats, he is kind of kick-ass, rock hard in every edition. And the thing about Golgfag is that you, as is often the case with these characters, you should not think of them as an individual because they're almost always with their retinues. In his case, he's almost always with his band of other ogres and with staff
his
as
man-eaters would be pretty spooky. In that little punch-up.
Yeah, I think it would be a fun one. This is Sean. As much as I love questions like this, this is one of those ones that's a tough call. Very much, I'd say, stats-wise, it's very easy to call them one. But if we look at them in context of the world, I reckon each of them would have their own individual advantages.
Yeah, Golgfag in particular makes it rather amusing because if you were making this argument for real, you'd have to have a debate about, well, what magic items does Golgfag just happen to have on him?
It could be anything.
I mean, even in one of his short stories that we'll talk about later in this stream, he literally has a random assortment of magic items that actually help him against a really dangerous opponent. So it just depends on what he has as well. Tyrant, besides Dragon Ogres, are there any other factions ogres have difficulty getting along with? I know they have been known to have friction with dwarfs.
So I think the real answer to this is all of them. Because ogres are not friendly creatures.
Very rarely is anyone very excited and thrilled to hire ogres.
Yeah, but they bring advantages. So just imagine yourself in the Warhammer world for a moment. If we try to separate ourselves from discussing stats and the realities of them, just take a brief moment to think of yourself as, say, a dwarf, since you brought up dwarfs. So you're a dwarf king. And you're sitting down looking at a particularly nasty group of greenskins who are besieging your community. And there's some passing ogres. Nobody likes ogres. No one likes them because they're big, they're nasty, they have exceedingly large hungers which need to be sated. But the fact that they're big and nasty also means that they are potentially very useful against your enemies. And they are not particularly moral-based in that they don't really care who they work for. So you've got a choice. Do you want to fight against them because the greenskins hire them, or do you want to fight with them because you hire them?
Yeah, that's
question number one. Now, you, as a dwarf, will have had a fairly long life, probably as a king. Let's hope that you have. And you can look at how ogres work, and you know that if you feed them, if you treat them well, if you do what they like to see done, they will be relatively loyal. In fact, very likely very loyal, particularly if after a battle, you say you can eat all the corpses. They will suddenly be a very happy group of ogres, as long as they're winning. And they are mercenaries, which means they come with the problems of mercenaries, but the idea of going against them might be enough for you to go, no, we're going to take them in. Some dwarves will never do it. Some dwarves will go, yep, nope, never. I'm never touching them. Ogres can't be trusted. Other dwarves won't just begrudgingly do it. They'll sit down and they'll go, that is the correct choice. Because if we don't, they will be against us. And they will simply hire them, bring them in, do the thing. I think that picture spread across the Warhammer world can be retold again and again and again. It's not just can you get on with them? It's, do you want to face them? The ogres, though, when they do get in with other groups, tend to assimilate particularly well. They pick up the bits of armor for their allies. They slap them on. They start following the customs of those they work with. They tend to fit in far better than most people realize, meaning that for all ogres largely can never be trusted, they're also a group of peoples that, under certain circumstances, can be, to now contradict myself, trusted.
Yeah, it really is. They do tend to be very much a catch-22 of like there are disadvantages to having them on your side, but being against them tends to be significantly worse.
Yeah, and you tend to find ogre mercenary groups will move to areas of conflict, and they will often sit in the middle. They'll just move in and go, hey, we're here. They'll set themselves up a big fighting pit to keep themselves amused. They'll send out their scouts, their various hunters, to start picking up the food that they need to do what they need to do. They'll be looking for big monsters, largely just to kill them themselves and show how big their bellies are and eat them. So they'll be setting themselves up in the local community and showing off to a degree in a fashion that the other forces that are about to go to war will see and go, oh, shit. Oh, crap. That means that they might hire those ogres. So immediately you tend to find that begrudgingly other generals will be moving up and saying, we need to hire them fast because we need to get them loyal to us, not to the other side. And then they'll be able to do a nice little juggle between the two. Who's going to pay them the most? Then they choose one side, they go over to that side, and they typically stick with that side because broadly, the Maneaters as a whole are loyal to the cause they're in unless something goes wrong. If they perceive insult, if something really goes out of shape, if someone's nose is bent out of shape, or if they start to lose badly, and they lose badly because of something that wasn't their fault, you tend to find that then they start getting a bit uppity. But you tend to find most of the stories of the ogres betraying the other side tends to be because the other side did something to kick them off. So, yeah, you can see why many other factions would take them in, but at the same point, you can see why they do so begrudgingly.
Yeah, one of the things we'll talk about that's quite funny with Golgfag is actually Golgfag for an ogre mercenary is actually one of the least reliable, which is particularly hilarious. It's because he's a bully, but we'll get into that. And he's also very greedy. He's very greedy. Donovan, given how ogre digestion is and their size, I imagine they'd be quite hard to get drunk. They must love dwarf ales. It's both very strong, very nourishing. Yeah, they do love it, which the dwarfs don't like because there have been a number of dwarf holds that have fallen because the ogres want their beer.
Indeed. To pull out a direct quotation about Golgfag, he is marked as having drunk more of Bugman's 6X than any other ogre living, and possibly any dwarf living, because he loves the stuff. It's particularly potent, particularly strong, and with an ogre's constitution, he can drink barrels of the stuff, where your average dwarf is drinking a few steins or mugs or some equivalent and necking that. He can knock down barrels and really enjoy it. But you tend to find that in the Warhammer world, there are some very strong examples of alcohols that are made by not just the dwarves, but by orcs and various other species as well. And they're often used to inebriate and bring on side species like giants, for example, where they make stuff that's proper rot gut, terrible stuff that for giants go through their system with ease, and the same for ogres. And many ogres are brought on side with alcohol, exceedingly strong alcohol that they can brew. Particularly greenskins are known for this, and their fungus brews.
Yeah, there's a story I love from the 8th edition Wood Elf book that talks about one of the Wood Elf kingdoms gets an ogre tribe that's passing through really like blackout drunk, which is really difficult to do, but Wood Elves have like magical dream wine and stuff. They get them so blackout drunk and feed them that they get them to agree to attack a Skaven Undercity and wipe it out. But the ogres don't remember agreeing to it. So when they kill all the Skaven, the Wood Elves show up and go, here's your reward. The ogres were so profoundly uncomfortable at the fact that the elves had played them like that, they refused to go back into Athel Loren. They went around it because they were like, nope. Spooked? Absolutely not. We're not going back in there.
But it's a perfect example, though, of how you can create situations where ogres are working with species that you might not expect. Well, ogres and wood elves, never. Super xenophobic wood elves, that'd never occur. And there's a story showing that not only did it, but they did so successfully.
Yeah. Yep. Hutchins, Maneaters, 50-50. They're going to be your best mate with the best stories, or they think you're the meal the tavern keep promised them 5 minutes ago. We will. There's a story about Golgfag that actually revolves around that concept.
Yeah. You're not wrong with that one, Hutchins.
Yeah. Ricky Scotty, happy early Thanksgiving with the fam before I go back to sea. I hope everyone here enjoys their loved ones. Got to go. Be safe. Will you be safe as well? Good to see you. And yes, happy Thanksgiving in advance for everyone that's celebrating. Jonathan Scott, do you know why Golgfag's Maneater's greatest enemies are the Amazons of Lestria? Because when he fights them, there's nothing to eat. Like, what? When he fights them, there's nothing to.
Jonathan Scott, I'm not getting the joke, and that's really bugging me.
I got it. It got Maneater, but there's no men.
Oh, I'm an idiot.
But no, it took me a minute. It took me a minute.
Thanks,
there we go.
Jonathan. Super appreciated. I'm an idiot.
And that one took me longer than I am. I am embarrassed.
I should realize I'm a total idiot.
Well, he even hyphenated Maneater for me to make it easier.
Totally did.
All right, so oh no, we got one more from Donoman, and then here we go. Do you think ogres like to have their own alcohol similar to Ereg, made from the fermented milk of Rhinox, Mournfang, etc.? I would say that's probably a very fair idea.
I don't think that's just a fair idea. I think that's almost certainly going to be the case. They're going to be using fermented anything, not just the various milks they can get their hands on. If it can be turned into alcohol, the ogres will be turning it into alcohol. And fermented milk from the Rhinox, I think, is an almost cert.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, Golgfag Maneater, hitting up some highlights and talk about some story stuff. So, Golgfag Maneater, for those curious, originates from the Ogre Kingdoms. He wasn't born elsewhere. He's actually born back at home in the Mountains of Morn. He comes from a tribe known called the Saberskin tribe.
Do you want to know what his original tribe was called? Because I think I've got that written. Yeah, it was originally the Rutdrogs.
The Rutdrogs?
The Rutdrogs. Rutdrogs. Rutdroggs. The Rutdrogs. So yeah, he was the chief.
Does that mean anything?
No,
British?
Is that correct? Let me just say, yeah, he was the chief of the Rutdrog tribe. He absolutely was.
Is that just like they were like that sounds like an ogre word, or does that have like a British meaning?
No, not at all. They were making it all up. And he used to work around the areas of the Misty Mountain, which of course you will recognize from Grom the Paunch's story, because he was a primary combatant alongside Grom at that time, because Grom came from the Misty Mountain at that point too. So there were characters that interacted.
Wow, what a small world it used to be.
What a small world it was. Yeah, quite. But yeah, they moved on from that. But he was often working for goblins back then.
Very cool. Okay, so in the 8th edition timeline, 6th to 8th edition timeline, you have out in the Mountains of Morn, he's born in the Saberskin tribe. And eventually, like many ogres do, when they kind of come to that adolescent, young adult phase, he leaves. Which there is a short story, if anyone wants to, which is called The Revenge of Golgfag, which is super fun. It kind of follows his first great adventure, leaving the Mountains of Morn alongside, I think it's Fulg Longstrider, I think it is, which was a pit fighter that he was friends with who was in the same tribe as him. One of the things that's interesting is it actually talks about that. He talks a little bit about the Goldtooth tribe, Grease's Goldtooth, and that they are not on good terms because of ogre politics, which is actually really, really fun to think about, of just that they kind of fell out of Grease's favor and got exiled for reasons that are not described, but leads into some fun speculation. But Greasus makes his way across the Darklands and eventually falls in with another ogre tribe that's not tribe, but like a band of mercenaries that's wandering around, and they make their way down to the Empire. And this whole big quest happens that if you want to go read the story, you can. But the big thing that it boils down to, that are a couple of interesting things, is that he ends up in Sunland. And what's funny is that Golgfag is revealed very early on in this point of the story to be capable of reading, which is pretty rare for ogres, the ability to read.
It's not just rare, it's pretty much almost unknown.
Yeah, and I think it literally says he learned to read from a wandering firebelly he met who had a herd of thunder tusks, which is very random but very funny. Because that's the kind of shit Golgfag would get up to. But what's funny is, according to the story, he's outside of Fyldorf, but it has a H in it, so it's PH Isledorf. And it's utterly ruined. It's utterly destroyed. And the story plays it off that it's basically a part of the Empire that got blown up when Gorbad Ironclaw came through, and it's just been a ruin ever since.
Sure.
Which is odd, but what's funny, and the author did not do this on purpose, but if you actually wanted to play this as like, it was, it's been another place that got messed up from the Tarmacon invasion, but took place a little later in Golgfag's life, it could actually work well if you wanted to update the story to work in that way. But it's definitely a Gorbad Ironclaw thing, because they talk about it later on. But the big thing is that Golgfag's first big opponent, other than the ogre, the tyrant of the little group that they're with, that he fights, and eventually manages to bring down later, is that his first big bad that we get to see in this story is he goes up against a Necrarch vampire. And the story is super fun because it shows how hilariously bad Golgfag is outclassed by a vampire. Like vampire is way scarier than any of the ogres. He's fucking terrifying.
Vampires are though.
And Golgfag, the thing that makes him so fun in all of his stories because he has 2 short stories you can actually read about and also pops up in a number of the army books, is that for an ogre, Golgfag is really, really clever. He's very smart.
If I was going to call out a single trait for him, if you're looking for him, beyond his extraordinary ugliness, which is brought up in more than one place, the most ugliest, horrendous looking ogre you've ever seen, one of his core traits is that he is clever, capable of judging the situation he's in and changing side or doing what needs to be done to ensure his own survival and the survival of, hopefully, those he's with.
Yeah, so we get a whole thing happens between him and this Necrarch where he almost gets basically dissected alive, but he manages to defeat this vampire literally through wits and a little bit of luck. Mostly wits, but he defeats the vampire, and one of the things that's fun about the story is you can see that Golgfag quite literally has this easy come, easy go mentality, where if he sees something that he thinks he can wear in any fashion, he literally just picks it up and puts it on his body. Like when he goes through the ruins of Fyldorf, he finds dead soldiers, and he's just constantly picking off pieces of their armor and strapping it onto his body where he could fit it, just adding to him. And when he gets back to his tribe, they kind of look at him funny. They're like, "Why are you wearing all that human, like that slim armor, that Umi armor?" And he's like, "Because it fits." And they're like, "Take it off. It looks weird. Like culturally, that's weird." He goes, "No, I'm not going to take it off." And ends up playing a significant role later on in the story when he ends up discovering a magic item that literally basically sends out blinding light, and it plays a huge role in how he's able to defeat a tyrant in a fight, because he finds a magic item that blinds the tyrant so it can't see him, and he's able to beat him purely through wits, because once again, he's very heavily outclassed by this much older, fatter, bigger ogre, but he's clever. Which comes back again and again and again, which is probably, to be frank, the most dangerous trait an ogre can have is smarts. If you're going up against an ogre that can think, you do not want to fight that ogre. Because you're going to die, more than likely. After he escapes from this scenario, the fun thing is that you pick up a little later where the tyrant he was fighting keeps leading this tribe around the empire, and eventually this tyrant finds his way to the moot. But when he gets to the moot, he runs into Golgfag, who has taken up post as a guardian of the moot. He's its protector, and he is fat, happy, and well supplied, because that was one of his first very successful jobs, was working for the halflings of the moot. And he did really well, and he kills and eats all of his original enemies, which is why the book is called what it's called. One of the funny things, though, is that Golgfag does eventually leave the moot on rather bad terms, because Golgfag, as is revealed in some of his stories, he has an appetite for halflings. There's a hilarious note about him in 8th edition that Golgfag resents being called Golgfag Maneater sometimes, because he thinks it implies that men are his favorite food, and he heavily disagrees. Men, he finds, are a terrible food most of the time, but he says halflings are his favorite, but everyone insists on calling him Maneater.
That came from 6th edition originally.
Oh, 6th edition, yeah.
Yeah, it was repeated in 8th.
Yeah, which is particularly great. That, like, ogres, you see this in the editions where ogres have this concept of big names, where when they do things, they usually get, like, a title that's kind of a bragging story for them, but it also talks about what they've done. So they might have, like, Giant Breaker or Long Strider, or, in this case, Maneater. But like with all big names, there actually is an origin story behind the Maneater title. Which is that when Greasus was working for, I want to say he was working for the Talaeans, but because there's mention of a paymaster, so it's definitely a dog of war situation.
I wonder if it originally came from that one, actually, the Dog of War book. I haven't looked at the Dogs of War for a while. Should check that.
It might have been.
It might have been.
So he, the big thing was that when Greasus was working within an army as a mercenary at some point, there was an argument, and it's noted that it was a drunken argument, which never ends well, because the man must have been drunk to be arguing with an ogre. Golgfag and the paymaster of the army he was working for were arguing about payment. So there was a disagreement about how much or what they had been agreed to, and Golgfag got frustrated enough that he picked up the paymaster and he ate him whole in a single bite, which must have been absolutely fucking horrifying for everyone in the vicinity, because that's a nightmarish image. And then he picked up the money and he ran, and the ogres just skedaddled the hell out of there. And one thing that you'll find that we'll talk about as we kind of go through his stories is that Golgfag, despite being one of the most famous mercenaries, he is a... Oh, did I say Greasus? Sorry, I meant Golgfag. But he is a hilariously backstab heavy mercenary. Like, he really has that mercurial mindset of that if he sees something that he can take advantage of to get a gain and then skedaddle, he will do it. He doesn't give a shit about what enemies he makes. Because as we go through his stories, you'll learn that while he is a very well-renowned mercenary, there are a lot of people in the Warhammer world that hate him.
Yeah.
Hate him. Because he backstabs them.
Yeah. But you tend to find that his stories are not cleverly written to justify it, but they're most certainly given a process. And for example, he is hired to do a job. Like, for example, he is hired by Ungrim Ironfist to go take out Nashrak, big war boss. He does the job, they have the fight, and during the celebrations, now no longer working for Ungrim, he raids Ungrim's treasury and runs. So you tend to find that once he's done his job, he often does his betrayal. So it seems to be the general trick with him is to keep him on job.
Yeah.
If you keep him on job, you tend to be okay. For example, when he's working for Lorenzo Lupo down in Tilia, he has similar issues. His job is basically be part of our army, scare off others. But his army, as in his bunch of ogres, are terrorizing the locals because they're big, burly ogres who want to eat, which causes all manner of problems and eventually ends up with Horse's head sitting inside. Horse's head sitting inside his bed as they try to get rid of him. But broadly speaking, he doesn't really betray until he's no longer working for a group. So it seems to have, if you look between the lines, some form of morality, at least forging his decisions, which is the second I'm not working for someone, I'm working for myself, which means I'm going to take your stuff. Am I working for you now? I'm not so sure I am. Thanks for the stuff. I'm out of here. And he's quick to move on, but equally quick to return to his ex-employers who he's pissed off and say, I could work for you again.
Yeah, there's a notable the Ungrim Iron Fist story is actually particularly amusing because it basically is just a double-sided betrayal of that. Initially, that story follows along that, which it's actually a surprisingly old story, like Annie was talking about earlier. It
starts in 5th edition in the Dogs of War. That's when it's first dropped out. And it gets repeated out into 8th edition and also has slightly different versions depending if you look on the dwarf side or the ogre side, because different army lists pick the story up with different parts.
Yeah, so the general gist being that Golgfag originally was working for the orcs. He was originally part of Nashrak's little squad, and they were devastatingly effective, and Ungrim was having a really hard time with them. The dwarves of Kadakadrin were struggling to deal with this, not a but a big old swarm of greenskins. Until, in kind of typical fashion, Golgfag got in an argument with Nashrak. If I recall correctly, Nashrak was getting irritated at him because he was eating too many goblins. They
were both drunk. There's slightly different variations of the story, but basically they were both drunk and they get into an enormous argument. And Golgfag's having none of it.
Yeah, and the argument ends with Golgfag getting so angry that he rips one of Nashrak's arms off.
Yep.
And runs away with it.
And heads his way over to Ungrim Ironfist and says, hey, I'll join you. Here's proof of my intention. And slaps down that big torn-off arm at Ungrim's feet. And Ungrim's like, yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, so sure enough, he works with the dwarfs. And if you actually have played the Total War Warhammer campaign for Ungrim, one of Ungrim's quest battles is actually about Nashrak. So it's about the story. Obviously, Golgfag doesn't play a part in it because it actually dates back to Warhammer 1. If you go back and play like the original Warhammer 1 story, it's a much longer quest battle with a lot more flavor text. And it's interesting to see them retell the story without Golgfag's involvement because he wasn't in the game yet. They didn't have any ogres. But with Golgfag's help, the dwarfs crush Nashrak's horde. Big reason being that Golgfag's there to help. If I recall correctly, I think Golgfag actually ends up personally killing Nashrak. And they have a rematch, though, with Nashrak only having one arm. And like Andy said, afterward, as the dwarfs are cleaning up and everyone's like, yeah, we won. And he was paid. He was paid what they agreed on. He looks over at Ungrim's like baggage train and is like, that's a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And the dwarfs can't run very fast. Yoink.
And they're drunk. They're all drunk. They're having a giant celebration. And he does what he does. He's no longer under the employ of the dwarves. He's now a free agent. And he decides to act like a free agent, nabs their stuff, and goes down into the Empire. And it's from this point forward that we get all of our Empire stories, because Nashrak tours around through the Empire. From there, moving down into Tilia. From Tilia, over into the Border Princes. From the Border Princes, beyond. It's interesting also to note that in most of the stories of Nashrak, where they give a timeline of where he's been... God damn it.
Golgfag,
Nashrak.
So many G's.
Jesus, there's so many G's. Golgfag, most of the stories suggest that he originally came down towards his first employments with Ungrim from the Chaos Wastes, where he had been before, tying in to the original first edition version where he came from the Frozen Wastes in the north, suggesting that if you want to plot his path, that he started in the Mountains of Morn, went north to the Chaos Wastes, went down from the Chaos Wastes into the World's Edge Mountains, from there into the Empire, from there into Tilia, from Tilia over into the Border Princes, and probably after that on ship round to Britonia, because he does a whole ton in Britonia as well.
Yeah, and we'll get into some of his weirder locations in a little bit as well, because he gets into some places where you're going to go, what? But we'll get there when we get there. So after the Nashrak incident, there are quite a few fun stories involving him in the Empire. There's actually another short story that I haven't had the chance to read yet, but there's another short story that involves him getting angry at being shortchanged by a group of Empire people. While I think it's like the Battle of Whitestone or something, because he has a couple of short stories. You can still find them as PDFs on the Blackbird Library website. They're very cheap to pick up because they're online, but he does have a particularly notable story that's brought up on some timeline stuff where there's a ogre tribe that we know of called the Rock Eater tribe. And the Rock Eater tribe almost gets exterminated. And Golgfag is noted as being the one that saved them fairly early on in his career. Because supposedly what happens is that they were going through Stirland and they were at a river along the Stir, and they were in this area called the Stir Point. And basically they had gotten surrounded by an Empire army that was pissed at the Rock Eater tribe, and Golgfag being the mercenary that was working for them, for causing issues. Eating people, eating cattle, being a general menace, as they do.
Okay.
And they were so heavily outnumbered and pinned in against the river that the ogres were going to be wiped out. But in a quirk of fate, the Stirland River Patrol that was supposed to go down the River Stir and land north of Golgfag and then offload and then come down to help destroy him the following dawn, they got lost a bit at night and they landed at the docks where the ogres were and did not realize it. But Golgfag, being alert and realizing he could take advantage of the situation, did what he does best and immediately launched a surprise attack on the Stirland River Patrol, and they got massacred. And now they had a handy number of boats. So they basically abandoned and ate all of their big beasties, got all the ogres onto the River Patrol boats, and then sailed down the river laughing at the Stirland army, who were very embarrassed and very upset because the ogres got away with all their stuff and just peaced out. Because Golgfag is, frankly, which you'll see in a lot of the stories, is very good at running away. He's amazing at running away.
Yeah, he's Yeah, I think that's fair. He's very good at getting the best out of a situation for himself and knowing that if he doesn't leave, he's going to be in trouble. Something that your average ogre, who are not necessarily known for their abstract thought, are not necessarily that great at doing. It's one of the reasons why his standard bearer, Scaff, has stuck with him for so long, even though his standard bearer has had a part.
Oh yeah, we forgot to talk about Scaff's issue.
Yes, Scaff's issue is a standard bearer, which ties through to the Ungrim Iron Fist story because Ungrim manages to capture good old.
Right, that's because we hadn't gotten there yet. That's what
we hadn't got that back. Indeed. He manages to capture him again later when he moves up through the mountains. But to sum up this little part before we go back into the super chats again, what we have is an ogre mercenary captain who has been there and done that. And by that, I mean, at the midpoint of his life, he goes from his starting point in the Mountains of Morn all the way up to the Frozen Waste, down into the Old World, and does a complete tour of the Old World. In the Old World, he works for Greenskins, he works for Orcs, he works for the Empire, he works for Tilia, and he also works for and against multiple people that we know from various other books. Lorenzo Lupo, for example, if you know him from the Dogs of War, or alternatively, Ungrim Iron Fist. A whole host of characters who are pretty big and pretty influential, many of whom he pisses off, many of whom he ends up really annoying, because his ogres tend to eat everything in their path, meaning that they're somewhat unruly. So you tend to find that they have one of two ends. One, Nashrak betrays them somehow. Nashrak, I said it again. Golgfag betrays them somehow and moves on, or alternatively, the employer moves them on. Lorenzo Lupo, for example, moved them over into the Border Princes to do big battles over there.
He literally did the meme of, I'm going to pay you $100 to fuck off.
Yeah, basically that. So they get paid to go pissing off elsewhere, where you'll find others will literally just push them out. So we've got someone who moves around the Old World, and we know at this point, eventually gets on board ships and carries on outwards from there.
Yeah, so I will catch up on Super Chat stuff a little bit, and then we'll get back into some of his shenanigans, because he does have some actual shenanigans that are going to be worth talking about. Because there are two that I genuinely think that if y'all are listening well, you're going to go, I refuse to believe you, and we're going to say, nope, and it's true. He really did that. Jack, what reason would an ogre fall to Tzeentch? Ogres can be relatively simple creatures. Yeah. Of that, if they're allowed to do whatever they want and they can eat and they get to fight, that's really as complicated as it gets. So there have been ogres that end up with chaos hordes. And because the chaos horde is just constantly moving around fighting and they don't care to rein the ogres in, they let the ogres do whatever they want. They get settled. And they can sometimes end up finding that they enjoy the life of working for these powers. And because they're so close to these ruinous forces, they can attract the attention of the gods, which can result in them starting to mutate and starting to fall to these powers. It takes time. And Chaos Ogres are rather amusingly not as many of them are not as crazy hardcore supporters as you might suspect. Some of them take vacations and go home and visit with their tribes, who are very happy to see them, because chaos and mutations is not a big deal in the ogre kingdoms. And they high five each other, give hugs, and then they go back to join the chaos horde.
Or high 6 or high 7.
Yeah.
How mutated they are.
There's actually a note about how in the ogre kingdoms, when the chaos ogres come home to visit their tribes, sometimes the regular ogres are jealous because they'll notice the chaos ogres are more efficient at eating because they have extra mouths or extra hands to shovel in food with. And they're like, oh, I wish I had a mouth in my stomach so I could eat more easily.
And in fact, you've just hit upon one of the clean answers to this. Ogres have a different set of needs. And that's what it all boils down to. What causes you to fall? What causes you to take that step to go in a different direction? Change, for example. And here we have a clear desire, something that they want to be better at consuming. Point number one. And yes, there are multiple ways that one can achieve that through chaos. Chaos can be very simple in its insidious nature, and ogres, being simple creatures, can as easily fall as any others. Just look at their core needs and look at how those needs can be answered by chaos. And suddenly you can see why some would fall to Nurgle, some would fall to Khorne, some would definitely fall to Tzeentch, that core need of change to become something different. And it manifests amongst the ogres as much as it does any other species. But ogres, because of their simple-minded nature, tend not to be easy to corrupt. Not only that, they are physically far more resistant to corruption as well. They're like halflings. They don't corrupt easily. You do get mutants. It's like you get mutant halflings too. They're just relatively rare by comparison. But once they begin to fall and they've tipped over, that's when you tend to find that Chaos Ogres can become not necessarily fanatics to the cause, but just lost. The lost and the damned, so to speak. And that can occur. But many of them are surprisingly resistant. They keep all of their core characteristics. They return to their tribes. They go back to where they came from. They don't necessarily do the chaos thing in the same way that other species might.
Yeah, like if you read a good example of like ogres that fall really bad, or like the plague ogres from the Tarmakon story, where Tarmakon really badly corrupts some ogres because he has like Nurgle's full attention, and is able to get them through a big ritual. But generally speaking, they tend to be surprisingly casual about it, but not always.
Yeah, they've got quite a different view to humanity, for example, and the various different realms of humans and how they cope with chaos and or don't. Most humans typically say, slightest hint of any potential chaos corruption, you're out. Where ogres are far more laissez-faire with it, and because of that, it makes it harder to corrupt them as well. Because there's not the temptation, you slip to it and that's it. There is no going back. You're fucked. Where the ogres are like, yeah, come on back, you'll be fine. So it's harder to actually make them properly fall, but it can and what does happen.
Yep, which is a lesson humanity can learn from, but they will not.
Of course they will not.
Jason Rooney, hey, breadlords. Oh, it's a Lorebeards. Haha, very clever. Has Golgfag ever met a friendly plague ogre who's friends with the Chaos Dragon talking donkey gore? Not that's been written down anywhere, but with Golgfag, I would never put it past him. That's
getting past the humor of the statement. Could we have ourselves Golgfag meeting with friendly ogres who are very different to him because of their chaos leanings? Absolutely. In fact, it's not just hinted at; it's strongly hinted at that most of Golgfag's earlier years were probably spent in the Chaos Wastes, establishing his own skills and capabilities up amongst the various Chaos hordes that are up there. So the answer is yes, probably.
Yeah, I would be willing to bet a significant amount of money that Golgfag has had Chaos Ogres as part of his man-eaters.
Oh, I think that's almost certainly the case. Yeah, definitely.
Donovan, given how you said ogres dislike elves because they skinny and halflings because pudgy, am I correct in thinking the scale might go something like regular Skaven, then goblins, elves, humans, orcs, dwarves, halflings, Skaven brood mothers?
I mean, it's, as much as that's almost humorous in terms of presenting it, kind of, yeah. The more weight that you've got on you, the more the ogre will look at you and go, yep, that's certainly. So being a big, podgy fellow is likely to get you more respect if you're a thin individual. So you tend to find that the most effective fighters on the front line for humanity are also the least effective communicators when it comes to speaking to orcs. Interestingly, though, many of the imperial nobility, for example, are not very good fighters. They're pudgy fellows who sit at the back, and they're far more likely to get a good response from an ogre than almost anybody else. Indeed, getting somebody who's particularly hefty to come out and do your communication with you
bring out the Burgermeister
is a really good idea. In the same way that dwarves respect beards because it shows, or long hair because it shows time that you put into a thing. It shows the amount of time that you've spent on yourself to ensure that it hasn't been cut, to ensure that it hasn't been broken in some fashion. So long beards tend to make for better ambassadors than short-haired individuals. I mean, if you want to get on well with dwarves, have a long beard. It will help, because it matches their cultural norms. In the same way the ogre cultural norm is size, because they believe the more you've eaten, the more effective you are.
Yeah, also, as a fun fact, if you want a good laugh about ogres, go check out the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd Edition compendium, the monster manual. What's it? I can't remember what it's called. The bestiary. Because they have a lot of quotes from various characters. some of which are more humorous than others. And there is an ogre character who occasionally pops up in some of the lore bits where he'll talk about how good eating whatever the subject matter is. So he'll talk about how good the eating is. Him and there's also a Skaven assassin that's interviewed that talks about how to poison various things. They are by far the two most hilarious characters in the bestiary. It's a great book.
That book was written by T.S. Looker, and it's a good book. It's worth having a look at if you haven't already. If you just want to see a bunch of amusing snippets about how the Warhammer world might view all the various creatures that live within it.
Gaston, how do man-eaters far from home worship the maw? It's actually not that difficult. That's something well built into ogre culture. Ogres have a really simple thing of that when they eat, if you want to pay offering to the maw, you dig a hole in the ground, and you just like, if they're really simple, they'll just dig a hole and throw a little bit of like scraps, like meat in there. And that's an offering to the maw. If they're going to be more elaborate, they might put like little stakes in it. And if they're going to be more elaborate, they'll dig a big pit and put stakes along the sides, and it'll be a maw pit where they not only throw offerings, but they have pit fights, which is where pit fighting comes from.
Mm-hmm. So the concept of the maw and the pit is something that ogres take with them everywhere. And it can be, as Sotek says, as simple as just a quick hole in the ground, which is filled with whatever scraps you've got left, you're feeding them all. Or alternatively, it can, if you're sitting in any location for any length of time, you build bigger pits and bigger pits. And the more that they take in as a group, the more that goes down in the meat that gets thrown down into the pits, where they will then host their fights. And it is a bloody, horrific spectacle. Something that is truly disgusting for those who are not ogres, but the ogres themselves absolutely love wallowing through this rotten stench meaty pile that from their perspective isn't rotten, it's sweeter. The meat smells better, where to a human standard, that meat is gag-worthy awful. It is quite literally awful often. It's the worst. So one must avoid, but not the ogres. They can go through that, and it's not just edible to them, it's better. The longer it's been down in the pit, the sweeter that particular meat, and the victor gets to eat, obviously, those whom they kill when they're down there, and discard the rest into the great big maw pit that is left behind. It's pretty awful. Disgusting.
Yeah. Ogre pit fighting is probably like one of the most horrifying things you could see ogres getting up to. It's not at all nice like you would think it is.
Yeah, it really isn't. But it is sanitized in multiple places. So, for example, they change how they act around other groups. When they're, for example, hosting their pit fights over in the Empire, you tend to find that their pits where they do their pit fightings are much cleaner, much cleaner, because they realize what the local social norms are. Similarly, the pit fighting idea is what eventually becomes the gladiatorial contest of Tilia, because the ogres brought that with them into Tilia, and Tilia used that. It becomes the great bullfightings that you get over in Estalia as well. All of those have roots, cultural roots, through to the ogres.
Yeah, ogres are the best race, which makes them really fun. They're the best race of when their cultural ideas are challenged, they adapt rather than getting defensive about it, which is really unique for them.
Yeah, they just fit in a way that most other species don't. Their culture is all about adaptation, development, taking on, much like, as we suggested earlier, Golgfag, taking on the armors, taking on the clothes of those that are around, because they're there. They kind of don't care. They just take the trappings of where they are, and sometimes when they see it being effective, duplicate and copy. They are very much great copiers. Not necessarily great doers, though. They would make almost certainly a pile of different cargo cult style cults, if you know what a cargo cult is. The idea of seeing a thing and just copying it without any awareness of what you're doing. You're just copying
that's ogres
hoping for the outcome.
Yeah.
Because the ogres themselves are just fitting in, and when they move elsewhere, they might continue to repeat that, but ultimately, at its heart will be that constant tug of wanderlust and the tug of the maw that sits grumbling away in their belly and lying beneath their feet at all times. In the same way that some real-world religions point in a particular direction to make their worship, the ogres have their own direction, which is down towards the maw.
Darius, can you do an ogre Maneater ogre in roleplay? Yes, super easily. So easily, it's not even funny. Actually, I think if you pick up the 4th edition supplement, Maneater is one of the careers they offer. Also, how do the Maw tribes differ in Age of Sigmar? Not a ton. The ogres although they've been kind of like brought to be much more in harmony with the greenskins, because they also worship Gorka Morka, but they worship him in the aspect as the gulping god, which is basically just the Great Maw. The one thing they added that I really, really like, and this is something that I think you could do in fantasy very easily, and I think it's actually really cool, is Age of Sigmar developed this idea that the ogres have what's called the Maw Path, where they set up a house, they set up like a home, right? They build up their camp at the tribe. And what they do is they ritualistically eat in maw-like patterns. So they leave their home and they go in basically a circle to make the shape of a maw. And when they get home, they celebrate, they have a big feast, and then they go out a little wider, and then a little wider, and then a little wider. So they have these circular patterns around their tribes where the different maw paths have led them. And if you are passing by ogre tribes, the more rings that you see of just desolation and destruction where they've eaten everything, you know, the more powerful and terrifying that tribe is, which I think is a really cool concept.
Yep, ditto. Really like that. And I think that'd be something that would port over very, not just easily, very well. It very much matches what the ogres are. And it's something I'd love to see culturally added to how they express themselves. Because one of the problems in terms of the writing for the ogres so far is that they make lots of hints concerning what ogre customs are, but they leave very little detail, leaving you to have to sort of make it up. There's bits and bobs here or there, but not a great deal. If anything, the best resource was almost the 6th edition army list, who were the one where they were literally making it all up, because they went to town with describing how everything was different there. And the later editions, they sort of refined it and removed all the bits that were less important. And through that removal, left stronger stereotypes, perhaps, but perhaps less detail as to how their culture works. And as someone who likes the roleplay side of things, particularly, and the world building, it left it feeling a little bit less. So, yeah, that sort of detail is just chef's kiss.
Yeah, miniature-wise, ogres have been pretty boring in AOS in the grand scheme, but lore-wise, they're pretty interesting. They're actually quite fun. And if you're ever like wanting to do ogre stuff, I'd heavily recommend just picking up the Maw Tribe books and reading through them, and just literally take the parts you like and take them to fantasy. It's very simple.
Yeah, I'm well up for that. Yeah.
Phil, ogres can sometimes be seen as little more than bigger orcs that eat a lot from the way that they speak. How would you go around dispelling that notion? Personally, I think there's something to the fact that their leaders are meant to be great providers to their people rather than just be the best killer. What do you lads think?
Okay. Go first?
Yeah, I'll go first of that, because I know Andy will have some word, because I remember we talked about that when we watched the ogre reveal trailer, that it's like, oh, they have the exact same accent that greenskins do.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I would say is that for tyrants, one of the things I love about Grease's Goldtooth, and something that I think is good to expand out to all ogres in general, and with Golgfag as well, is that when you talk about the ogre characters, it's often not how big and strong they are that determines who's in charge. It's how smart and resilient they are. That I really like. And it's something that the lore itself doesn't reinforce very well when it's talking about tyrants, because tyrants, it's like, oh, it's the biggest guy. But like, Greases was not the biggest tyrant when he took over as ogre tyrant. He was instead really smart. Like, one of my goofy, like, a lot of his titles are from how creatively he killed people, where he went up against an ogre that was much bigger than him, and Greases waited for his opponent to get down in the maw pit, and then instead of going down and fighting him as fair, Greases jumped from the top of the maw pit and landed on him and snapped his neck, because he just dropped all that weight on him at once. And the ogres were like, was that cheating? Like, technically he killed him in the pit, but like, and it caused like a political thing if the ogres were arguing whether that counted as cheating or not. But it's clever. Like, there was a tribe that wouldn't acknowledge Greases' power, and he knew he couldn't beat them. So instead he climbed up a mountain and he caused an avalanche to bury them under lots of rock and snow. And those are the stories that I think are better representative of what tyrant should be, is clever, which is not what you would naturally think of. Golgfag Maneater is the best in the business, not because he's the biggest, but because he's the smartest. Which I really, really, really like for ogres.
Right, so ogres. Are ogres greenskins? No. Do individual writers for Warhammer get that? No. And I think it's fair to say that the comment that many view them as little more than big greenskins and characterize them in a similar fashion is sadly true. And I don't want to diminish that idea, because if you go out there and start reading any of the stories, you tend to find that the only difference is that they'll say, oh, these are the greenskins that will get on with other people.
These are the reasons we let in. Yeah.
Yeah. And sadly, they get often little better characterization than that. Their accent is often pitched as deep Cockney, which is exactly the same as the here we go, wag monsters that are the orcs. But they tend to go with deep voices and an all right, lads, all right, Slim. And that's about it, which I think is unfortunate, because it's not going to characterize them as something different. And I think it's the differences that make the ogres interesting. Their society is completely different. It's far more welcoming, believe it or not. It's far more open. It's far less war-based. It's instead based on almost a meritocracy. And the meritocracy with ogres is, what's the biggest thing that you can get inside you? Sometimes that will be down in the fighting pit, who beats the other, and I eat my opponent. It will be out when you're hunting, when you take out something particularly large and you manage to nom your way down on that particular thing. And the more you eat, the bigger you get, typically. And that meritocracy is also, as Sotek suggests, not just simply based on physical strength, because it's who gets to do it. And intelligence often allows you to do things that pure brute force don't, meaning they get to eat the bigger things, which in turn gets them bigger as their bellies swell. And we end up with a Greasus situation where we get an ogre that may have started off not necessarily as the biggest and the strongest, but most certainly
is now
becomes that. So we have a far more open society, a culture that's based on a whole host of different norms. We don't have that wag ideal. We've got the focus on the maw and what it means. But that focus, all of the cultural details get lost in, all right, lads, let's go kill it, which is unfortunate for many of the portrayals. So to cut all of that down, I would say, read the books. They absolutely aren't anything like greenskins. But be aware that many of the writers, when they present their ogres, will just basically make them big greenskins, and that is sadly to their detriment, because at their very base level, they've got a culture that has sexual differences. We have men and we have women. We have kids. We have entire communities and tribes building in a different way. Orcs don't have that in the same fashion. Orc tribes and how they build are so very, very different. They have different wants and different needs. And that means that they, in terms of their portrayal, are completely different. And if you're ever using them in the roleplay game and you're building your own stories, the needs of a tribe of orcs, greenskins, goblins, whatever they might be, and the need of a tribe of ogres are so completely different that it means that the characters portrayed for each will be completely different. So yes, I think they are very, very dissimilar. Certainly more dissimilar than, say, Cathaeans are to folks of the Empire. They're both basically at heart human, but they're very different. I would say the ogres are much more different to greenskins than even that, because they are so culturally different.
Yep. And agree with that. And when it comes to accents, at the end of the day, Games Workshop, one of their biggest evils is that everyone in Warhammer has a British accent, except the Lizardmen, I think.
But literally, it's worse. It's worse. There are so many different British accents. There are so many. And they focus in on pretty much three. London, upper class, Scottish. And they forget the rest. Occasionally you'll get a bit of Welsh. Occasionally you get a bit of Irish, as in the British Isles as a whole. That's not a British accent, obviously Irish. Occasionally you get a bit of that, but there are so many more accents. They forget them all. They only care about, all right, lads, or, oh, excuse me, old boy, that's not appropriate. Or, I'm a Scottish character. Oh, I'm a dwarf, maybe. And occasionally Yorkshire. Don't forget Yorkshire. Oh, someone's already mentioned that. For your dwarves. Okay. All right, lads, I come from north. But there's such a wealth of accents, but they forget about them, meaning that something like the ogres, which are, let's be honest, an east-facing group, they would have accents from the east, wildly different accents to the rest of the accents, but they haven't done that at all, which I think is to its detriment.
Yep. Yeah, and ogre, the last thing I'll say about ogres that they suffer from is GW also has a bad habit at certain times where you'll get authors that have what I like to call comedy races, and those tend to be your greenskins and your ogres, where they will make them so comical that they kind of lose it in the sauce a little bit, which is, it's fine from time to time, but it's a little over the top sometimes.
Yeah, I think it has its place. Warhammer has always had its goofy angle, and to dial away from that is to dial away from a lot of what Warhammer is. Squig hoppers are stupid. They're truly stupid. They're basically just, those hoppers that people used to bounce about on the 70s and 80s. And I know they're just that because I know the person who made them. I know the person who did the first art of them. They're nothing more than 1970s space hoppers. That's all they are. But, they're not. And the Doom Divers are properly stupid. There's tons of stuff in the Greenskin side that is properly daft. But equally, it's really freaking horrific. And there is a lovely balance that you can play between the two. And sadly, that balance is often a little bit off. And you're right, some of them are played for pure comedy alone, and the ogres often fulfill that role. I'm here to eat you, ha 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 ha.
Now, Dynaman, given how basically all of the main species have resistance to corruption, I'm starting to think it's more that humans have a weakness to corruption.
Yeah, that's true.
But you're not wrong.
You're 100% true. Humanity is by far one of the weakest species when it comes to corruption of the Chaos Gods, and that can no more be seen by who makes up the majority of all their armies.
Yep, and why the gods love them so much. Time 25. I want someone to write a story about an elven diplomat assigned to the Great Hall of Greases. That would be a great story.
That'd be a cool one. You'd always go, do you think he would try to, put on a fat suit to make himself look better?
That would have to be the most punished, disliked elf in the Phoenix Court.
How would that elf get their voice heard in a court where size means everything? That would be. I genuinely think that would make for a very fun story. Like, I could see like a wizard trying to use weird rituals to make themselves appear fatter and stuff like that. It could be interesting. And possibly, you could even see, would that work? Because they would get called out for lying.
Yeah, I know that'd be the thing, especially because Greasus is much more perceptive than anyone thinks he is.
Elves,
yeah.
That would have fun elf bullshit in there somewhere.
Saul Eder, sorry for off topic. What are the books that inspired Warhammer beyond the Elric series and Lord of the Rings? And i.e., what's your syllabus?
Oh gosh, it's a surprisingly long and also surprisingly short list. If we go back to the original inspiration for Warhammer, we're talking now Warhammer First Edition, when Brian Ansell was sitting down with Rick Priestley and Richard Halliwell, and they were building the very first editions of Warhammer. There are very clear influences there, and they are the Eternal Champion. I mean, Chaos, it's written right into it. Yeah. But also, you may be surprised, D&D. D&D is hard-coded into a great deal of the miniatures that we're using. Just look at the miniatures, and you can see immediately what the core inspirations are. They are elves, they are dwarves, they are humans, they are Lord of the Rings. All of the miniatures that people are interested in fantasy were there, and then it was added to the grim, gritty British realism that Michael Moorcock was presenting. There are surprisingly few that we really need to call out as big ones. I mean, some people like to call out Jack Vance or various other fantasy authors that were prolific through the 70s. But really, if you want to just boil it down to its basics, you're already there, which is Michael Moorcock mixes up with Lord of the Rings with D&D. You take those three, and you've already got pretty much every ingredient that was put into the first edition. Now, we got Rick Priestley on. I'm sure he would wax lyrical about other things. And in fact, he does if you go check some of his interviews. But if you boil it down, that's it. Because that is what was reflected in the core material. And it pretty much covers everything you find in Warhammer 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, and really into 4th edition as well. There is little else that's needed.
Yeah, and then from there, it kind of started to get more self-sustaining.
Yeah, totally. By 4th edition, it's entirely self-sustaining, but up to that point, the 4th edition is still wearing its influences strongly on its sleeves, and the core influences are definitely Michael Moorcock, and surprisingly less of an influence than many people believe, but J.R.R. Tolkien, but much less of an influence than many people think. Plus, just standard myth. You've got to realize that many of the people who were writing this were deeply into historical myths as well, particularly on the roleplay side. So
Yeah.
real world history is, I would argue, a far stronger component of what the Warhammer world becomes than, say, for example, J.R.R. Tolkien.
John Man, would ogres mind if another species decided to find them in the maw pit or not? Like if they were working with orcs and some of the orcs were like, "Oi, I want to have a go at that." Yeah, no, ogres are like Andy said, they're very welcoming. There's a very old but excellent set of books about, I can't remember what it's called. There's a series of books about a little girl who basically gets kind of adopted by some ogres, like an ogre tribe, and she basically lives in the Mountains of Morn. It's an older series. I want to say it came out in like the 2000s, maybe before then.
Possibly.
It's on Black Library. I cannot remember the name of it for the life of me, but you can check those out. It's a bit older, but it has the Mountains of Morn in it, so it's not ancient. But ogres are extremely welcoming of people that are willing to embrace their culture. They have no issue with it whatsoever.
Indeed, and they're very welcoming. They understand that other species are much less capable than them at many things. Orcs kind of aren't, though. Orcs and ogres can go toe-to-toe against each other, particularly the more powerful, older orcs. And them being wanting and willing to go down into the pits and fight with them, they'd be well up for that. If they lost them, might not even eat them. They might just take an arm, for example, and basically celebrate their great success down there. If you wish to impress ogres, that sort of willingness will very much impress them. And if you defeat an ogre down there, they will see that as an extraordinary success, and they will expect you to eat a part of that ogre, if not all of it, if you can possibly do so. So yeah, they would expect you to do so, because consuming is a core component of ogre society. Man-eaters are so-called for a reason.
Yep. It's Wild Kingdoms in Savage City by Robert Earl. So it's part of the Florin and Lorenzo series, which is a surprisingly large series that goes to literally everywhere.
Oh, everywhere. Yeah, totally. I haven't read those for ages.
Yeah, that book, when did this come? Of course, Black Library can't be bothered to put publishing dates on their website because, that would be reasonable.
Yeah, quite.
Darius Rose, do ogres sometimes worship some of the big animals like the Stonehorn? I don't think worship is the word I would use. They like them because they have lots of meat. Yeah. Yeah. And
I want to take that down. And if they're not capable of taking it down, they might obsess over it. That great creature that sits out there in the mountains that they've yet to defeat. Various ogre hunters will be thinking of different ways they could try to take it down. I think worship would be perhaps a word that people outside the ogres might attribute to it, because there would be a lot of ogre attention to some particularly large animals, yes. But I don't think worship is, from their cultural perspective, how it should be seen. The worship would be very much to the core concepts of the maw and consumption. They are looking to eat it.
Yeah, ogres do have fascinatingly, I'm glad you actually brought this up. They have a very obsessive relationship with challenges. If something is a challenge to ogres, they will flock to it. And that's a lot of why they like the Mountains of Morn. Like there's a mountain called Mount Thug that is a living mountain that literally eats people that try to climb it. Like it tries to lure you into its caves, or like it'll shake to try and knock you off and stuff. And to the ogres, summiting Mount Thug and making it back down again is like an incredible achievement that they heavily celebrate. It's super fucking hard though. So yeah, they are very much about that life, so to speak.
Yeah, totally.
Tom Man, would ogre see such a list of titles and be like, respect, and then see his bony physique and be like, wait, how? Possibly. Ogres do like big names. Like Greasus has a lot of titles. I think he has the second most that I'm aware of behind Cetra. But they would, I would say that
they're simple creatures. They just laugh.
If someone was telling them about Cetra, like if you watch The Nightmare Before Christmas, how the Halloween characters assume a lot about Santa Claus because they think his name is Sandy Claus. It might be like that, where they hear Cetra's titles and they might think that he's bigger than he actually is.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. And they'd expect his hat to be huge. Because Warhammer is the game of hats, as we all know. Biggest hat wins. And I mean, Cetra's got a pretty big hat.
Yeah,
But I think that if they were in a position where they were waiting for some great list of titles, they wouldn't have the patience for it.
Oh yeah, no. Ogres, dude, they're not very long.
They would be shouting and bellowing all the way through this tirade of titles being read out, laughing at it as the most ridiculous, overblown nonsense they've ever heard. They'd be belching, farting, making all sorts of bashing of shieldy noises to basically upset their opponent.
Yeah, Cetra would fucking hate them.
Hate them completely. And would they view the undead as anything other than a waste of potential eating? Yeah. The undead are not necessarily their favorite enemies.
No, there is a hilariously stupid story. I can't remember if it's in the Tomb King book or the Ogre book about an ogre tribe that deliberately goes down to Nehekara because they want to grind up kings for bread
to make their bread.
Yeah, it was some goofy ass story. Phil, haven't watched the beginning of the stream, but Golgfag, the first ogre to have the idea to go and fight for other factions. No. If you've already answered, then do you think the ogre's adaptability is the engineer quality given to them by the old ones to help them serve alongside other races?
Okay, so this is a question that needs to be more broadly spoken about in a more general ogre stream, I would suggest. But at its heart, they are definitely creatures that can work with anything. That has a downside because they also work with chaos. So it does suggest that whatever the old one's intention for them was, it wasn't as simple as they will be able to work with all my other guys. It was perhaps deeper. So yeah. And as for how long they've been working for others, pretty much since their inception. Ogres have always been like this. Admittedly, though, the wanderlust aspect of their character and spreading out across the world didn't really happen until the Maw impacts down into the world. So you could blame that on the Cathayans.
Yeah. Though, I mean, even like Andy said, back to their inception, there are notes about how the ogres fought alongside Grand Cathay against chaos. So they were there in the beginning. Sir Pence, I've said it once, I'll say it again. The accents of the Empire stream. I would love your takes on accents in the Warhammer world. If we were to make a whole stream out of that, I feel like it'd have to be like accents of lots of things, but that would be a weird stream. Maybe one day if we run out of other ideas.
Yeah, so I'll make a small comment on this one because it's something that we've discussed for the Lawhammer side multiple times because there are sensitivities here that you have to be aware of. Because in Lawhammer, we have very clear accents for different parts of the Empire, and that's fine. But when we go beyond the Empire's borders, it becomes much less fine. Because if you get someone who's like me, very white, doing really bad accents of China or Nepal or Ind or whatever, it's kind of racist and it's kind of wrong. So we have chosen not to do that. But if I was voice casting it, so if I was casting the accents for the various people from, say, Cathay or Nippon, I would be casting people who were of Chinese, Japanese extraction and with accents that matched, because that makes sense. In the same fashion, my ogre kingdoms almost certainly would be far more Eastern in accent. But if I did it, it just looks a bit weird on a stream. Now, if I was doing it at home for my own home games, makes no difference at all because nobody else is out there looking at it. But if I do that and do really bad, dodgy Indian accents, it just particularly from the British Empire, who pretty much subjugated India, that just looks dodgy as all hells, and it was almost certain to get criticism. So we just don't do that. We just pretty much do our Empire accents according to the accents we've chosen, and our ones beyond that have the faintest of accents here or there where it makes sense. But we try not to punch down by mistake, because it can often just turn into a parody where you sound like a cartoon character rather than sounding like a serious character within the Warhammer world, which is something that we try to avoid. We don't want to be doing that.
Yep, easy trap.
Easy trap to make. Yeah, totally.
Wales is just a myth, Andy. Everyone knows it.
Say that to Mark Gibbons, my good pal, who is Welsh.
Adam Russo.
See him shaking his fist right now.
Thank you for the super chat. It would be interesting if they explained that ogres act similar to orcs because ogres are known to adopt traits of other cultures, and ogres and orcs are often times neighbors that have to coexist. Yeah, that could be a way to address it.
I would have no issue at all with that, Adam, in the slightest, in fact. I would say that would give you more justification for certain deployments of types of ogre, in the same way that some ogres over in the Empire take on Empire traits, ogres over in Nippon will take Nipponese traits, and similar. So yeah, no problems with that at all. In fact, I like that. And it justifies previous iterations of how ogres have been characterized. In that, as a writer, you can say some of them speak like this because of this, which then says all the times you've seen the ogres speaking like this has now been covered, but ogres are actually like this, and you can paint a far bigger picture, taking lots of ideas from lots of different places. So yeah, completely agreed, Adam. Good idea.
Yep. Darius, why are ogres the best depiction of masculinity?
Oh God, no. They are not the best depictions of masculinity.
They're the best depiction of American sitcom fathers from like the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, they're awful. I mean, it's something that we often don't discuss when we are drilling down into the details of some of the darker aspects of Warhammer, but they're awful.
Oh yeah, ogres suck. They're terrible.
Totally suck. Like dark elves, totally suck. Indeed, there's tons of things in the Warhammer world that totally sucks. We don't spend time discussing those parts, because if we did, half our streams would be this sucks, that sucks, this sucks. We're not here discussing those parts. We're discussing what is and what isn't the case and why they culturally act the way that they do. But in this case, ogres are truly awful. And I would personally try to avoid depicting them as the best depiction of masculinity.
They do certainly enjoy eating men, though. They are the kings of that particular sphere.
If you view masculinity as who can eat the biggest men, sure.
Yep. Donovan, given ogre adaptability, I think it's likely they try and tame other beasts of other areas like Mornfangs, Rhinox, etc. when they aren't available. Like Arabian / Indian ogres riding elephants and those riding north. Yeah, that's just flat out.
Completely.
There are notes about ogres trying to tame things like stegodons and mammoths, and sometimes they're very successful. They're pretty good at it.
Yeah, this is something that is a trait of ogres that's often forgotten. And I think if we're looking back to and discussing Golgfag himself, is likely a core component of his mercenaries. When we look at army lists for Warhammer are very much the simplified version of each one of the various factions that you get in the game. And they don't detail in any degree at all the complexity of the various peoples that they're dealing with. In the Empire, for example, there are no cavalry that aren't knights, which is clearly nonsense, because the state army has cavalry. The state army has cavalry, but they have none. In the Empire army list, there is no cavalry at all. There's only Imperial Knights and then monster riding various cavalry.
Well, you got your fast cap, but no like melee cap.
But there's no proper cavalry for just the state army troops with just state army lancers and similar. They're not there, but they exist. I mean, they exist in multiple books. Just go read The Riders of the Dead, for example, where you've got the demi-lancers and how they're pushed in that particular book. But there's loads of cavalry all over the place, but they're not in the Empire Army list. In a similar fashion, our Maneaters, as they're spreading around the world, would be taking on lots of local custom animals, which means that there would be riders of elephants, riders of stegodons, riders of other big creatures. And I think very likely would pop up if you did a proper Golgfag Maneater army and did it as a full army. You could very easily just sub in. So, for example, you'd say, I'm just using the stats for Rhinox, but I'm making it an elephant, for example. And that would be totally acceptable, to the point that I would say it would actually characterize the army better, make it much more realistic for how Golgfag and his various mercenary troops would be represented.
Yeah, and you'll see that in a lot of like Games Workshop publications. They're rather notorious for that, because especially old GW and the White Dwarf magazines or the Citadel journals really like subbing or like just messing with minis. Like I remember seeing the 40k Squigodon, which doesn't really have a place in modern greenskins, but they were like, I'm going to use my Squigodon model. I'm going to put orcs on it for fantasy, and I'm just going to use the rules for a Stegodon. It's like, all right. That just stuff like that comes up. Time 25, Archives of the Empire Volume 2 says that ogres can't feel enough fear to panic. Is that supported by other lore? No.
That was weird.
Yeah, that's just whoever wrote that was not thinking very good.
Yeah,
they're not immune to psychology.
They're not immune to psychology. That's never been a rule in Warhammer ever. They panic all over the place. Panic spreads through ogre armies like it does through any other army. When I read that, I was very much, oops, the editor really should have got rid of that, because it's not the case.
Yeah, because, remember that the army books are like the core canon, and ogres suffer from panic and terror like anybody else.
Yeah, one of the core jobs for a developer for the roleplay game is to ensure that the material that they get in from writers matches directly with whatever the core source is. Now, the core source for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition is the 8th edition of Warhammer. The secondary source is almost certainly Warhammer Old World, as it comes in and adds a whole bunch of extra details, and that will almost certainly become a core source over the course of time. Might not be the case, might be the case, depends on exactly how their license works. But 8th edition is the source, and in 8th edition, they panic. So that should have been removed, from my perspective at least.
Yeah. Diamond, do you think that the Oni and Nippon could likely be a subspecies of ogre that settled and something happened or something entirely separate? It would just depend on whoever was writing the book wanted to deal with it and like how much they had on their plate. Because oftentimes you'll find writers, or not writers, but like the designers, especially when you're dealing with minis, trying to make shortcuts. So it would just depend on who was doing it. You would hope the answer is no to make it more interesting. But like, if you go back, there are some books that have mention of Cathay having something along the lines of one-horned ogres that are still around somewhere in Cathay, which would be like, oh, well, if they have horns, then they're not normal ogres. They're like a subspecies of ogre, which could be the case. I mean, that's fine. You would just like want to do it interesting, but it would just depend on who was in charge.
Yeah, totally. I mean, Nippon clearly will have ogres because ogres have wanderlust and they go everywhere, which means they go to Nippon, which means Nippon has a population of ogres moving through it in the same way that the Empire has a population of ogres moving through it. There is no doubt about that. That is the case because the Warhammer world is the way the Warhammer world is, and the ogres have a specific character already created for them. The only way you could say they wouldn't is if you created a Nippon which is entirely 100% bricked off around the edges and they don't allow anybody into the
which
island.
would be boring.
Which would be unrealistic because even in the real world, that didn't happen, even though they tried to make that happen. It just didn't. So ogres would be a core component of what Nippon is included in Nippon. Now, could you just call them Oni? Yeah, sure you could, but it then takes away one of the many potential things that you could bring into a unique version of Nippon away. Why not just have them be ogres that are passing through?
Yeah, they would more
embrace ogre traits, leave them as ogres, give them a unique name that the Nipponese would certainly refer to them as, but still boils down to ogre, and then have the Oni or indeed any of the other various Japanese cool stuff that you could draw from be unique. I think would be better.
I agree. Terran 25, ogres are awful. You guys are trying to hurt me, huh? You can take it. You're a big boy. You can take it.
Yeah, you can take it. Ogres are awful. Let's be honest.
Korenshima, eating contest. 1 ogre versus 100 professional sumo wrestlers. That's a pretty significant number of sumo wrestlers. I think they could take him, but, you know, now, I will say that he would be willing to eat much more grotesque things than they would, including some of them. But, yeah. Jack Ruby, did you mention Throthjog, Golgfag's rival? So no, but this is a fair moment to bring him up. So this is a character that was added in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition, just to add some more fun characters into the world, which is that there is a rival mercenary band to Golgfag's mercenary band who have kind of a competing relationship, which is the ogre Throthjog and his mercenary company, the Pay Swords. And apparently they've clashed a number of times, but they have a salty relationship because there was an eating contest between Throthjog and Golgfag lost. And he has been very bitter about it ever since and really fucking hates Throthjog, which is fine. Like, there's not a lot there. You know, there's talk about how they have very different personality types. Golgfag's a little more anger and impulsive, and Throthjog is disturbingly quiet and calm for an ogre. He's a little more frosty in demeanor, which is fun. There's not a lot there, but it's interesting and it's cool. And
yeah, and broadly speaking, whenever you're adding in new characters like this, one of the first questions that I generally always ask a writer is why? What are you doing? What's the core story that you're attempting to tell here? What are the themes and motifs that you're attempting to explain concerning ogre culture? And what we've got here is something that doesn't really tell any new stories. It basically just says, yeah, ogres have eating competitions and there's different types of characters and sometimes they have rivals, blah, blah, blah. That's almost a standard story. So for me, it doesn't add anything particularly unique or interesting or exciting because it's not plumbing down into one of the core concepts of what it is to be an ogre. It's just another NPC. It's just another thing that has been added. And you'll find in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, particularly when they're adding new NPCs, this is really common. In that you'll often find a writer will come along and they will just create the thing that's on their mind at the time.
Wait. Okay, so I do want to stand corrected on one quick thing.
Yes,
he is a character that was very briefly. So 4th edition remodernized him, but he was very briefly mentioned back in White Dwarf 79.
Nice. Nevertheless, the point stands. What does it add? And whenever you're pulling up an old character or a new character or whatever, you need to think about the overall story. And this one is he's got a rival. It's fine, but I would look for more from it if it's on my side. But
yeah, to me,
I'm a whinger in general when it comes to developing material. I've got a very strong sense of what should and shouldn't be added. And if you're adding something and you're trying to build something new, you want to build something that's unique, exciting, and tells a story that the players or the readers might not expect. And this is a story that they absolutely would expect. So they could make that up themselves. You've got to do something that is creative and interesting.
The funny thing about this character is that, for the record, he's kind of picked up and dropped from an earlier edition. Way earlier edition, because his warband, looking at his warband, this dude is weird. His warband is made up of a Zote, a Famir, a Dark Elf, and a Beastman. Which, like,
now we're talking something interesting. Now we're talking something weird. How do you justify that? Oh,
yeah. So I don't think
I'm going to have to go check that one up because I don't recall that one because that's cool.
I don't think the 4th edition worries that much about the pay swords, but the pay swords are fucking wild.
The pay swords are more interesting than the character that they detailed.
Yeah. Jack Ruby. Any relation between ghouls and gorgers? Okay. So gorgers, I'm going to put this really simple because I want to get back onto Golgfag for the rest of his stuff or run out of time. But gorgers are basically ogres that are kicked out of the tribe and they're forced below, because the Mountains Mourn have a huge subterranean lair, and they're forced down there. Often they're abandoned as children or babies. And they're left down there to just survive on their own. There's a lot of warpstone down there, so they tend to get very slowly kind of corrupted by the warpstone. And ogres are very survivable. And it's kind of more of a mutation. So they're kind of like ghouls in that, like, ghouls are living humans that have kind of mutated and turned into these like subhuman monstrosities. And gorgers are similar, where they're kind of mutated sub-ogre monstrosities that kind of, but where humans cast out ghouls and hate them and despise them, ogres are pretty, like, they don't like the gorgers necessarily, but they utilize them. They use they know how to control the gorgers. They keep them, they don't let them hang out with the tribe, but they are totally fine with the gorgers joining their armies. Some ogres specialize in controlling gorgers by capturing them. Scrag the Slaughterer is followed by a shitload of gorgers. So the major difference, funny enough, is that the ogres are more accepting of them.
Yeah.
Because ogres...
broadly speaking, we have a similar process, but very different. So, is there any relation? No, because they're not the same. Completely different species, different environment. But if we look at it a bit more holistically, a bit more above it all, it's a species that has been devolved through exposure to nastiness. So you could say that there's most certainly a very similar process involved, but they have two very different outcomes because the underlying species are really quite different. And ghouls are, in terms of how they work, just really quite different.
Man, I really want to do a stream on ghouls because ghouls are
ghouls are cool and they're really weird.
Interesting thing. Yeah,
I really like ghouls, particularly because even the various army lists have had problem with ghouls because that sometimes be marked as undead, which they absolutely are not. So yeah, definitely something that could be cool for another stream. Do like ghouls?
I might put that on this week's vote.
Let's put that on the I'll be up for that. Ghouls is a good one.
Cool, fun bit of trivia. Dark Elves are actually really fond of ogres because of their brutality, their mercenary tendencies, and their capacity for extraordinary violence. So at least somebody likes them. People that care about efficiency or about like getting the job done do tend to like ogres. But it's just a matter of what are you willing to put up with. And Dark Elves, surprisingly, or not surprisingly rather, are willing to put up with a lot. But yeah, there are permanent employed ogres in Hargoneth. Which is very spooky.
The Dark Elves are, as we know, a slave taking faction. They use slaves all over the place. And that includes feeding their ogres. They have ogre slaves. They also have ogre mercenaries that they employ. And absolutely, the Dark Elves use ogres extensively. And Dark Elf mercenary companies are happy moving over there because they get treated very well in comparison to how they might be treated elsewhere. The Dark Elves are not the society that many people present them as, pardon me. They're much more effective and not quite as killy.
Yeah, there
but
is a
simultaneously they're awful.
Yeah, they're the worst, but they do have a ruthless
right.
pragmatism to them.
100%. And the Dark Elves are not just willing to use the ogres; they do use them all over the place, and more than just mercenaries, use them as slaves as well. So crossing, you are as likely to be taken in as a slave as you are to be employed, because Dark Elves are not necessarily the most trustworthy of masters either, or play masters, so to speak. But a good Dark Ogre mercenary company knows this. They know that there are limits, and it's that they're in a rare position where, you know, neither side are the scariest in some respect. They're both scary to each other for different reasons, and they both believe in a core component of might is right and being able to express that in a particular fashion. So, yeah, they do work well together.
Yep. Zarn94, you guys streaming is a pleasant surprise after a long work shift. See you in a couple hours when I get caught up. Well, we appreciate that. Yeah, I had a family function, so to speak, earlier today that kind of messed with our time, so we started a little later than normal. But glad we're catching some people that normally don't get to show up. Don Man, although Golgfag is willing to work with anyone, who do you say he's likes to work with the most / least? Also, do you think any ogre warbands have split up when disagreeing on who to side with, or would that result in a fight to death with the tyrant? Okay. Oh, okay. A couple of really cool things in here. So,
yeah,
who does Golgfag like to work with the most / least? Interesting. Golgfag, I cannot express to you how neutral he is of an individual. Of that, there are a lot of stories involving Golgfag, and he's pretty relaxed about who he works for and doesn't really hold on to much enmity. Of that, if he sees an advantage, he's going to spring on it if he thinks he can get paid. The honest thing that I would say about him is that Golgfag tends to have, in the stories that he's portrayed in, he tends to have a pretty good idea of who is the most powerful person in the area he's in and who's the richest. So who's going to pay him best. And he tends to prioritize who's going to pay best. Because there's a cool scene of him in the end times, because he initially gets hired by Belegar Ironhammer to help out with Carrick 8 Peaks. And Skarsnik sends an agent to try and turn him to work for the Greenskins instead. And initially, Golgfag refuses. He refuses to betray the dwarfs because he tells Skarsnik's envoy, the dwarfs pay better than you do, and I don't really think y'all have anything of interest to offer me, so no, I'm not going to work for you. I'm going to work for the dwarfs, especially because when I betray them, they get kind of bitchy about it. So like I'm sticking on this. And it's only when Skarsnik presents him with the literal crown of Carrick 8 Peaks itself, which is very, very fancy, and also reveals to him that Belegar is much poorer than he lets on to be, that Golgfag agrees to betray Belegar because Skarsnik can now pay him more. But he tends to be pretty intuitive about what's going to make him the best deal. And that's the only thing he cares about.
Yeah, it's a tough question to call on that one because of everything Sotek says. If I was to try and add some weight somewhere, I'd say that there's only one strong preference that he's definitely shown through the various iterations of the character, and that's that he likes to eat halflings. He thinks they're tasty. So you could argue that working with halflings and the potential options that comes there may sway him more, or being offered lots of halflings may sway him more. But I agree, he's not really that type. There was one other question in there.
Yeah, and so the second question about how do warbands handle disagreements? So it depends. If you have so a lot of the groups you'll find wandering around, whether they're man-eaters or tribes, it depends what their hierarchy is. Like, is it multiple tribes that have kind of absorbed together, or are they all purely individuals? But when there's a disagreement, it'll either be they'll split. That does happen, where a tribe will be like, we want to do this, and their bruiser or tyrant will be like, no, that's stupid. We're going to go this other way. And that'll happen. Now, that doesn't always happen peacefully. Sometimes the big tyrant might say, no, I need you and your guys. You're going to stay here, in which case there will be a fight. But it's ogres do have they have a very strong sense of one-on-one culture. Now, sometimes you will get tribes versus tribes, but if they're working together in any fashion, it's settled one-on-one.
Yeah, might is right. And it's very much down to the pit. Get into them all and see who can crawl back out again. So yeah, pretty much that. And you tend to find that at the core of their culture is if you've eaten more, you've got the bigger belly, and the bigger belly wins. And if you want to take on the bigger belly, then on your head be it. And you tend to find most of the ogres fall behind the bigger belly. That's their cultural norm, but disagreements happen. And those disagreements are generally...
A great example of this, go read the short story Golgfag's Revenge. It is literally about this scenario. Darius Rose, well, why do you have to make them sound so cool? Especially Greases. I mean, they are from a very far distance.
I mean, there's if you take in isolation almost any of the various factions in Warhammer, they are really freaking cool, but they're often also really freaking horrible. And that's okay. And because it's made up. And we're allowed to enjoy things that are made up with a different level of appreciation. We can appreciate that something is awful and something we'd never want to actually engage with and is as far from our real life preferences as possible, while simultaneously going, yeah, that's really cool and I really want to see that in my games, and I'd really like to see how people tackle that horrific thing in one fashion or another, and then possibly play out the morality tale that's attached to it. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with finding stuff that's awful cool, but simultaneously, you know, it's not cool.
Exercises in imagination can go literally anywhere and be super fun, but that doesn't mean I want to see any of that shit in real life. So back to Golgfag. One thing that I think it'll be fun to kind of break down for the rest of the stream, because he doesn't really have like a story, so to speak, of like he went A to B. It's more if he has snapshots. And there's a couple of snapshots that are really worth talking about for a bit, because they hint at some places and things that he's done that are bonkers. So one of which, a really fun one when talking about dealing with horrible things, is that Golgfag Maneater has canonically set eyes upon Skaven Blight.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know, Skaven Blight is the capital of the Skaven Under Empire, near in the zombie marshes north of Maragliano, or northwest. And the zombie marshes are a hellhole. It is not called that lightly. It is a gigantic, horrid marsh full of so much corruption that the dead do not rest easy. And the creatures that live there, like the fin worms and other type things, are horrific and are massive, nasty creatures. And there's warpstone corruption, and Skaven Blight, according to more sources, almost surrounded by like a poisonous mist, has never been seen outside of a very rare few circumstances. And Golgfag is one of those.
Yeah, Skaven Blight's a fun one, because Skaven Blight is noted in the various sources that mention it as not only being the very heart of the Skaven Empire, beating heart with the Council of 13 do their job, but being an absolutely impossible place to get into. It's not somewhere that you can easily approach, not just because of the marshes, but because of the Skaven themselves. They are legion, and they protect the place, and they have the very worst examples of everything Skavendom does to hand. All of the clans are present there. All of the great clans are protecting it for one reason or another. All of them are not only doing it because that's what they need to do to protect from outside influence, but because a great deal of the marsh is also put aside to feeding what's down below with their black corn and all the other horrible things that they actually pull together to feed everything that's down below the city itself. It's not an easy place to get to. He's been there. He's set sight on the city itself. He's not just popped into the marshes and had a bit of a go about. He's been there. Now, the story behind that, of course, is not detailed. So you can come up with your own variations of how he got there. Was he, for example, captured? It would be very much in character for him to be so.
He gets captured surprisingly often.
Yeah, but he generally always gets out of it, typically by eating all the people that he's been captured with, which is how he got away from Ungrim Ironfist. And Ungrim Ironfist was like, well done, mate, because you ate all the orcs in there, and I don't like greenskins. But he could be captured. Alternatively, he may have been a mercenary hired by one of the Skaven clans to fight another Skaven clan. Because one of the great, let's say, joys of Skaven Blight is that it's in a state of constant war. All the various clans are constantly not just factionalizing against each other, but literally killing each other, fighting. It's a place of warfare as well as politics. And he could very well have been there, hired to fight for one clan against another clan with some of his Maneaters, possibly with his good old one-legged standard bearer beside him, Scaff. There's a host of different stories that you could build for that, but he has been there and seen it, which is fun. And if you want to try and contextualize when that happened, because he's only been kicking around doing the mercenary job for about 60 years, we have a clear, obvious time because he spends a good few years in Tilia. And obviously, Skaven Blight is just to the north and the west.
Yeah. He lives around there for quite some time.
So he's around there doing things. It could very easily have been up there doing something and then back. He might even have been employed to infiltrate the place because many of the various
might have been a rescue mission.
Yeah,
totally. Someone that was kidnapped or something. Yeah.
Particularly if it's attached to Lorenzo Lupo. So yeah, there's a host of different stories you could pull down, but I think it speaks to the overall not just survivability of the character, but the capability of the character, because he's been in and out and has a host of stories that follow afterwards. So whatever occurred, it wasn't enough that the Skaven decided to send assassin after him, which they probably did for a while, and he's fought them off. So huge potential story there.
Yeah, there's one of the things about Golgfag that's quite fun because of him and his Maneaters is that Golgfag, despite being an ogre, he's actually incredibly capable of being sneaky. Like he's fully capable of having like the ambusher rule or the vanguard deployment rule and all these things because he just shares with his Maneaters. Of that, he is capable of strategies that a lot of people would not think an ogre possible. One of the things that like we laughed about in a prior stream when we were talking about the hobgoblins and how it would have made much more sense for the hobgoblins to do this. But one of the things that canonically happened is that Golgfag snuck into Minkle Zarnagrun somehow and got the gates open from the inside to let in Grimgor Ironhide's army. And it's like, now, did he do that through a stealth mission? Did he get captured on purpose and then break out? It doesn't say, but like he is a capable force of nature when it comes to getting a job done, which is interesting. Another place he ends up that is completely borderline inexplicable, but it says that he went there, is that it says Golgfag Maneater has been hired and fought on the shore or on the island of Ulthuan.
Yeah, that's a what, isn't it?
It's like, what?
It's kind of wild. And it's kind of wild because the island is protected by the elves, and they don't allow anyone who's not an elf into the island itself. Having said that, though, they've got their main port at Lothern, and there's nothing to say that it couldn't have been in and around Lothern or in that general area.
Lothern does allow visitors.
Yeah, it does. And indeed, there's many traders who work from Lothern. So I think it would be absolutely correct almost to have him possibly passing through Lothern, being hired in Lothern. It's obviously very likely he's been over onto Nagaroth as well.
Oh, yeah.
And being an unexpected mercenary contingent in and around Lothern. In fact, I think it's very likely that Lothern itself probably has not sizable, but almost certainly big enough population of ogres as well, because they get everywhere. They're like cockroaches in their own way. You'll find them everywhere. And I like that. It's one of those ones where you see he's done what now? And you go, oh, and it makes you go, how? And as someone who's trying to make sense of it all, you start building stories. And I think just those few words really does speak a lot to not only who he is as a mercenary captain and where he's been, but also to the high elves. What do they allow? What don't they allow? And it starts speaking to that and what might be occurring in Lothern as a whole. So anyone out there thinking about writing about Lothern, you've got a beautiful detail that you don't want to miss there.
Yeah, especially because, I mean, there are plenty of reasonable things for him to have fought as well. Like whether it's like, oh, there's like a pocket of dark elves or the Anuli Mountains, big, ugly, horrible things come down from those mountains.
Yeah.
That the high elves do not like dealing with, and ogres would be perfect for fighting one of the monstrosities that come crawling out of the mountains. Whether it's a chimera or a manticore or something nameless that's far worse, which could make for a really, really fun set of stories. There's, of course, one that is often brought up when people talk about Golgfag as one of his more well-known accolades, which is that he has been ceremonially recognized and awarded in public on stage by Emperor Karl Franz himself.
Yeah, totally. Which gives you context for where he was in the latter years of his career. So out of his 60 years, a significant chunk of those latter years must have been spent in and around the Empire between approximately 2502 up to 2522 in that area, because that's when Karl Franz could have done the deed. So it immediately gives you an idea that he's been in the Empire, gone out, and then came back again. So he has received accolade and decoration directly from Karl Franz, which means that he has done something for the Empire as a whole or for Reichland. It could be for Reichland, but it does say Emperor Karl Franz rather than Prince, but that's because he's only the Emperor as far as the battle game's concerned anyway. So they'll only ever say Emperor there anyway. But it is worth noting that that's called out. So he was in Reichland probably doing something of significant service to the Empire in that time. Just as a small aside as well, because I want to call out the earlier mention about Hrothjog. I was just looking up Hrothjog because I didn't remember Hrothjog at all. And it's fucking cool. I can't believe they didn't do more with him.
That's an old character.
It totally is.
I will say, yeah, apparently they brought him back for Archives 2 as a nemesis for Golgfag for just funsies.
I really wish they'd done something else with him because he's freaking awesome. I'm very disappointed not more was done with that. He's almost like a PC party of crazy. I love that.
I'd have to go look at it if they mention his party being that weird, because I saw the picture and I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah, totally.
What is going on here?
Yeah, it looks like it's actually a piece of art that was originally commissioned to be something different. So I want to go check it out. So
yeah, that's fair.
Very much pleasing me. I'm just a little disappointed they just made him a bad guy for Golgfag. Seriously? Is that all?
Yeah.
Anyway, that aside.
Some other things that have come up along his story. So to finish a little more specifically about his Ungrim story, it is one of my favorite things about Golgfag because it's honestly the dumbest thing he ever does in his entire career, which is that Golgfag, remember, he betrayed Ungrim, pissed him off. There's about a 10-year gap between when he betrays Ungrim and wanders off. And there's a mention that
if you want to contextualize this, we can almost time it as well because it's relatively early in his career. He goes north, comes down, meets Ungrim, goes through the Empire, goes over to Tilia, goes over to the Border Princes, then goes back up to Ungrim. So you've got the 10 years as he's going through Tilia and everything there. So we know approximately when that occurs. You're looking at about 20 years into his 60 years of moving around, but different writers might shift that around a little bit.
Yeah, and so there's the thing that he does is that he thinks that he can just scoot his way through Peak Pass, which is what Kalakadrin overlooks, without there being any problems. Because he forgets dwarfs do not take well to people that backstab them, and they remember it very well.
They hold grudges.
Only 10 years, Golgfag? No. So as he's passing through, Ungrim finds out about it, and there's this ridiculous fun story about Ungrim marches out with a little army of slayers, and they're outnumbered by the ogres, and Ungrim's waiting for him, and Golgfag walks up and sees Ungrim and the slayers and goes, uh-oh, but decides, you know what? We have them outnumbered. We could beat them. Let's throw down. And he gets the shit kicked out of him.
But there's more than one version of this story, because in the other version of the story, Ungrim Ironfist just leaves out a lot of beer, gets them all drunk, and captures them.
That's true. Yeah, I think the 8th edition version is the goofier fight version.
It's both.
Oh, it's just the different books.
Different books. Yeah. So be aware that this story has more than one iteration out there.
Yeah, I think the Ogre book has the version where he gets drunk and captured. I think, and the Dwarf.
I think that might be right. I think,
and
that's
the Dwarf book is the one where he gets beat up.
Or it's the other way around. I can't recall.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. Either way, depending on which version you want to go with, which they're both very fun. Either way, him and several of his ogres and several others get captured and taken down to Ungrim's dungeons. And Golgfag does what he does best, which is that he survives. Because down in this dungeon, he eats every single prisoner that Ungrim has, which
they're orcs as well, which is crazy.
They're orcs, ogres, and one other thing, and he eats all of them except for Scaff, his best friend, and his banner bearer. And
he just does eat his leg.
And yeah, there's a mention of him being like, no hard feelings. And Scaff's like, no, I understand. It's fine. But so yeah, that's why Scaff has a peg leg, is because Golgfag eats it to sate his hunger. And apparently Ungrim got informed of this, came down, saw the utter ruin that Golgfag did, and was like, you know what? All right. It just has them extricated from the dungeon and dropped off somewhere far away from Carrickadrin and told, get out of here, go on, get.
Yeah, the Ogre Kingdom side, because I've got the Ogre Kingdom book here, it's very much the dwarves ambushed them and threw them into a cramped dungeon, and they expected Golgfag to die, and it's on the other side where it was actually a bunch of orcs and ogres, which they basically scammed into drinking lots of alcohol, and then they captured them all, and for some reason captured the greenskins and threw them into a dungeon, and Golgfag ate them all of them. And
yeah,
Ungrim was like, all right, fair enough.
Yeah, I remember it's on Ungrim's personal page. They added the fun bit if he like fights Golgfag and beats him.
There you go.
But anyway, so he's been around. And once again, this guy has literally worked for anyone. Not all the stories are necessarily explicitly detailed, but like you could bet your money that he has worked for every playable faction in the game. Yeah. Of Chaos Dwarfs, definitely. Tomb Kings, definitely. Lizardmen, I'd even say, definitely. In the Southlands, maybe even in Lustria. But like, he is such a fun character because he is the best character in the universe who could show up in any story, and as like from a purely hardcore, not even if you're being completely unforgiving, unrealistic lore standpoint, you would look at it and go, yeah, that makes sense. It's fucking Golgfag. And the Maneaters, they come and go. You know, his army, there have been notes about he has ranged from leading an entire army. Like, it looks like a tribe, and it's got ogres of every kind and color and monsters, and just like a horrific horde, down to it's more of a little warband where there's like 20 of them. It's very laissez-faire, which is interesting that like there's a level of loyalty there, but Golgfag is very much a survivor in a lot of really interesting ways.
Yeah, and he's marked in almost every iteration of him as having a core crew, of which only one is named, his standard bearer Scaff. His cronies in the 8th edition, or his core mercenaries in previous editions. So clearly there is a bunch who have been with him for a very long time, the most battle-hardened core of his Maneaters. But we don't really get much in the way of detail for them, but they certainly would be interesting to detail out if you are out there thinking of a roleplay version of them. Don't just think of the core character himself. There are true characterful ogres along with them.
Oh yeah, each of them would be like a legend in and of themselves.
Indeed, those who have been around the world and have seen everything. If you ever look at any of those crazier ogre miniatures, where you might say an ogre dressed in Nipponese clothes, or an ogre who's got an ogre female with a big beard and a big rolling pin, or an ogre that looks like they've got
like
right out of
Lustrian dinosaur bit armor. And,
this is the most. They almost certainly are all inside. The Maneaters, because they are the ones who have all the craziest stuff from all over the world, and they are super characterful, even though in terms of what we are presented from Games Workshop, all we really have is Golgfag himself and the occasional mention of Scaff and his peg leg.
Yeah, though one of the funny things about Golgfag is that he, of course, is a very unreliable narrator. It calls him out on that in his profile of that Golgfag. There's actually several mentions in several editions that Golgfag is the loudest ogre there is. And he's very boastful, to the point that even though he's done all sorts of extraordinary things, and there are canonical things he's done, like showing up in Oathwand and being awarded by Karl Franz, he still, when he tells the stories, he exaggerates because he wants to make himself as cool as possible. So he takes stories that are already kind of ridiculous and makes them even more so, which is a fun element to his character.
And then when you add that along with all the other people living off his name, we have
there's other Golgfags. Yeah.
I mean, he's a character who is basically a writer's dream, because you can do almost anything with it, tell any sort of tale, and it might be true, because it's potentially told directly from an unreliable source anyway. You could tell almost anything. Whether that's Golgfag making up, someone pretending to be Golgfag. You can have him in multiple places in the world at the same time because it's just different ogres. He is someone who is very useful in terms of storytelling.
Yeah, especially because like you have that idea of someone coming to him being like, "Oh, you're the Golgfag that like did such and such and such and such," and he'd be like, "Yes, I did."
Yes, I did.
I mean, Al, you could, if an author wanted to do something really fun, it's kind of a shame no one ever did this. If you want to do something really fun, you could do a story that has a Golgfag Maneater interacting with a special character, wherever, and Golgfag dies, and it's revealed at the end of the story that he's not actually the Golgfag. He was just a Golgfag, which could be like a very fun twist to have in a story. All right, let's get these last little bits of super chats and stuff because we're coming up on time. Dino Man, fan theory. Dark Elf pirates either capture or hire Golgfag, then they try and raid the high elves, and either escapes or is convinced to switch sides. Oh yeah, I could easily be a part of this
work
story.
there. Yeah, I like those Dino Man, pardon me, definitely.
Hey again, I feel a lot of Golgfag diggers saw that stories stem from failed human adventures, where all of the humans died, leaving just him and his boys. Not unrealistic that there would be scenarios
unrealistic at all.
Yeah, there could be situations where he would survive and his employers don't. Not often, because he will switch sides during a battle if he needs to. But if I recall correctly, I think there might actually be a mention somewhere in one of the more recent books, like maybe one of the Cubicle 7 books, about like what he's alleged to have done to impress Karl Franz so much. And if I recall correctly, it's that he salvages a flank against a Beastman horde that's like collapsing. So like part of the Empire army is collapsing, and Golgfag and his Maneaters just plow into the Beastmen and hold the line. I'm pretty sure that's what it is.
It wouldn't be enough to receive a decoration under normal circumstances as mercenaries, but it might, depending on how the battle.
Well, it was like a huge horde in Reichland, and like Hellborg was there, and it was like a whole big fucking thing. But I know it's mentioned somewhere. I just can't remember what book it's in. Isti and Leon, do man-eaters have any traditions or usual tactics when it comes to getting jobs? Lying through their teeth if they need to, and exaggerating would probably be the biggest thing.
You got to get into the mindset of an ogre, where tactics are not normally the core raison d'etre. That's not really how they work. They just are. They are what they are, and everybody already knows what that is. They are big, huge, scary monsters that will eat you, or alternatively be on your side that you manage to eat with your enemies. Or, pardon me, your enemies become the food, would be a better way of putting it. They don't really need to have tactics to get jobs. They just need to be in the area. And then suddenly everyone's going, well, we either employ them or we're in trouble. So there's not necessarily that requirement for it. They just are. They don't necessarily go out touting themselves.
Yeah, like
people come to them.
Like Andy said earlier, we cannot express how much the lore is good about dialing down of you do not want an idle ogre near you. You don't. It's a bad situation because they're gonna get into things because they're hungry. And they're bullies too, a lot of time. Like ogres tend to live by a might makes right type mindset. So if you have something they want, they'll just take it unless you can reliably stop them.
Absolutely.
So if you have a single man-eater or even a couple of man-eaters hanging around, you want to do something with them because otherwise they're going to cause problems. Yeah, because Andy mentioned this earlier, but when Golgfag was working for Lorenzo Lupo, Lorenzo kept him and his man-eaters around for a while. Like they lived there around his area for like at least several months, if not years. And everyone in that area hated Golgfag and his man-eaters because they were jerks. And they were gross, and they were constantly antagonizing people. It mentions they were bullying and robbing people. And Lorenzo didn't care because it wasn't his problem until one time Golgfag broke into Lorenzo's winery, like where he stored all of his nice barrels, and stole a bunch of stuff. And then Lorenzo was like, "Oh, okay, fuck these guys," and came up with a way to get rid of them. So that's kind of the big thing is that, like Andy said, they usually don't struggle to get jobs because you need them. You either got to get rid of them or you got to hire them because just leaving them around doing nothing is going to be bad for whoever is around them.
Yeah, and you tend to find, as we've said already, that the man-eaters that are most successful are the ones that are often able to negotiate their way through what is effectively alien territory. If they're moving in singles and ones and twos, they've got big appetites and they're going to need to eat. They're going to be just literally eating anything they get their hands on. The clever ones will be eating livestock that isn't held by someone else, so they don't get caught up by the local authorities. The not very bright ones will just eat the first sheep they find, the first cow. They'll dig into it, which causes problems with the locals. How do we stop this thing? How do we get it? So they employ them to go hunt a monster that's locally causing issues. They're often employed to hunt down big creatures because that really excites them. It gets them going because ogres like to get the big thing.
And for the locals, hopefully also kills them.
Exactly. It gets rid of them and it gets them out of their territory. And then the ogre gets something coming back, gets the big feast for having killed the thing, is delighted, and then hopefully moves on. But when you've got a group of them working as a mercenary band, that requires generally top tier intervention. To move them on, whether that's the local nobility, whether that's the local army figures, whomever they may be, to get rid of them or employ them somehow. And they are always a problem, a thorn in the side, which has to be dealt with because they will eat their way through the local area like big meat-guzzling locusts. So, yeah, you got to do something about them.
Yeah, there's a fun in the Tribes and Tribulations book by Cubicle 7, they have a chapter for the ogres, and the ogre tribe, they give you an example, has a fun storyline to them where basically they set up shop on an imperial road and are just forcefully taxing people because one of their ogres has figured out the concept of taxes. And so you're, as the PCs, your job is to figure out a way to get rid of them because they're too big and mean to actively beat. So, you know, how do you go get help? Do you try and bribe them? Do you try and trick them? And it makes for a fun storyline.
And generally, the best way to get rid of them is always present them with something that they are excited to chase.
Yeah. Donovan, with multiple people claiming to be Golgfag, in some ways, he's the old One Eye of Warhammer Fantasy. Shows up basically anywhere, possibly multiple Golgfags in different places at once, etc. Okay. Well, yeah, great. Yep. Yeah, very similar.
I don't think that's necessarily a bad illusion, I suppose. Yeah, that'll do. Old One Eye.
Yeah, Darius Rose, how does Golgfag compare to most other combatants / normal tyrants? He's pretty on par for tyrants and bruisers. He's a big guy. He's been around a while.
Yeah, he is. He's stat-wise as well. If you just look at his stats, they're pretty much the same across the board. You tend to find that a couple of the special characters are a little bit better here and there, like on toughness, Rhesus, for example. He's a little bit higher in ballistic skill. It all equals out in the end. He's on par. He's a top-tier ogre.
Yep. Avani, now I want a story about someone hiring Golgfag and then gets confused because he hears that his opponent also hired a Golgfag. Oh, that would be super fun. Yeah.
Agreed.
Now has Golgfag simply changed sides? Is one or the other a fake, or perhaps they both are? That would be a hilarious.
Yeah, and I think that's a beautiful potential story. And if I was using Golgfag in say a roleplay book, and you're wanting to give the different aspects of the sort of stories you can tell, that would be one I would definitely be interested in putting forward as a potential adventure hook. Because that tells
kick-ass adventure hook.
Yeah, and it also tells stories about Golgfag and also the Maneaters and what it has meant to be a Maneater. The Maneaters have, over the course of the last 60 years, completely changed how the world views ogres. They're not just simply mercenaries anymore. They're man-eaters. Golgfag is not a minor character in terms of the impact that he's had on the whole Warhammer world and how they view ogres. And you'd want to tell stories that reinforce that with your adventure hooks. And that is a perfect way of doing it, showing how other ogres are riding on the coattails of Golgfag, and then possibly Golgfag's not even there at all. Which could also be fun.
Yeah,
there's different ways to handle that.
That would be super fun, especially because you'd have this concept of the humans or whoever hired them feeling like they've been deceived, but from an ogre standpoint, they haven't, because no, he is Golgfag Maneater. Like he is. That's his name.
Yeah, totally.
That's what he calls himself. So like that could lead into a really fun set of dilemmas. Tyrant 25. I've heard it put the ogres 8 below good and evil. Does that sound accurate?
I'm not quite sure what you mean there, Tyrant 25.
I've heard
what you mean?
8 below good and evil. I'm trying to guess that's a way. I feel like that doesn't.
Maybe it's meant to be R. Maybe it's meant to be R below good and evil, as in they're neither good nor evil. Maybe that.
Yeah, but I almost feel like 8 below good and evil is intentional because they're so hungry that they don't care. I've never heard that phrase. I don't know if you mistyped it.
So if you're suggesting that they are neither evil nor good, they are ogres. I would say, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Comparative morality here is always going to be tough because they have such a different form of mentality and how they view the world, and they're monstrous. They're monstrous in so many.
You're right.
ways.
He did mean R. So
He
R.
did mean R. So in many respects, yes, I would agree with that. Concepts of good and evil don't work at all well with them. But if you were in the Empire, they would be viewed in almost all situations as evil. They're wrong. They want to eat. They want to eat you. They want to eat your kids. They want to eat your crops. Probably not your crops, but most certainly your livestock. And in terms of comparative evils, that would be for you taking away what meager resources you may be able to gather, and effectively they're killing you. That is almost the definition of evil from many perspectives. But in terms from their perspective, they don't view that as evil. They just view that as a sustenance. They're almost like animals in that regard.
Yeah, there's a thing with ogres where ogres are not malicious. They kind of just are. Now, if you happen to be experiencing ogres, they will come off as super fucking evil. In the way that they're like a nasty predator species that are very indiscriminate. But to the ogres, I would say that concepts like good and evil, that is not something an ogre would really care or understand.
Yeah, I mean, they're not exactly the most intellectual of species, and their concepts of good and evil from the ogre's perspective are tied directly to the maw, okay, and what they consider to be right and wrong by what they consider to be the correct way to act in regards to the maw and feeding their hungers and eating the biggest thing that comes their way. They have a completely different set of moral standards that are not necessarily complex, but in comparison to the standard human cultural standard, they would be viewed very much as evil. But good and evil is always a difficult concept to deal with anyway, because it's so comparative. Yep. But in this case, they're not doing it because they're malicious per se. They're doing it because they're hungry, because they think it's the right thing to do.
Yep. Don Man, and this will be the last one unless any others come in, because we are out of time. Are non-Maneater ogre mercenaries a thing? Yeah. I mean, functionally, yeah. Maneater it's more often, it's best described as like, it is a title that a lot of ogres use that basically means they're a wandering mercenary that's heard of the term and they understand what it means and they take it on for themselves. But every ogre Maneater is a mercenary, but not all mercenaries are Maneaters because they might not be aware of the term.
Yeah. I mean, it's exactly that. Maneater is exactly as it's described. It's bluntly an ogre mercenary that is wandering around the world, eating the biggest thing, caught up with the ogre wanderlust. And I think it's also worth noting that there's lots of ogres that are wandering around that are not mercenaries per se. And by that, I mean, they're not necessarily working with an army or anything else. They might be just individuals who are just seeing what lies beyond the horizon, because ogres have got that need to move, that need to continue, that need to see what lies on the other side. The wanderlust that sits at the very heart of their soul, and almost all of them are taken by it at some point in their life. So there's lots that aren't necessarily mercenaries, and there's lots that have just stopped. The Empire is full of ogres that have possibly even been born there from ogres that have wandered out.
Yeah, you got Imperial ogres, Badland ogres.
Absolutely. Yeah. They're all over the place. But most of them at some point will go back to or make almost a pilgrimage to the Mountains of Morn, in particular to the Maw. But most of them will also do a wander around the world as well. So there are all manner of different ogres. The army list simplifies that all down to Maneater, because the army list deals with nice, simple concepts that you can put onto your battlefield. But the overall Warhammer world is a far more complex place where you could have an ogre cook, an ogre bodyguard, an ogre of various different stripes.
Yeah, which wouldn't be unusual. Yeah,
like it would be
there would be hireable ogres that are not mercenaries.
Exactly. In the same way that the Empire army list goes state soldier, in no way does that represent the bodyguard of the Elector Count, but it kind of does as well. Okay, there's a host of other jobs you can have beyond Maneater. But Maneater is the standard for the army list because it makes things nice and simple.
Yep.
And I'm going to say to you there, the Predator Rule 75, we discussed that earlier in the stream, so if you go back, you'll be able to find it.
Yep. And we're out of time.
Wow. Okay, so I'm going to do a super quick summary in this one because I love Golgfag, and I just want to do one. So my super quick summary is going to be Golgfag has been there since first edition Warhammer. He is a proper old guard character, the OG ogre. He is the first of the first in terms of ogres. Long before there was any Greasus or ogre kingdoms, or indeed anything we understand as ogres, there was Golgfag. And he has been with us through every edition of Warhammer in one fashion or another, repeatedly brought forth again and again in different iterations and upgraded each time in a different way. But at his core, he has maintained the same character, and that is, he is the Ogre Mercenary. He represents ogres and what they are to the vast majority of people who are playing the Warhammer game, as in this force that you can attach to another force. Because the Ogre Mercenary was the core component of what it was to be ogres in Warhammer, all the way up to Ogre Kingdoms. And even when Ogre Kingdoms came out, Maneater, the concept of the Ogre Mercenary, was attached to Golgfag very quickly, and all Ogre Mercenaries were pretty much named after him, because he was the one that created the concept all the way back in Warhammer 1st edition. So Golgfag, if you wish, is almost the epitome of what it is to be an ogre outside the Ogre Kingdoms. All of the stories that are attached to Golgfag are nothing more than a way of saying this is what ogres do outside of the Mountains of Morn, outside of the Ogre Kingdoms. This is what the ogres are beyond, and that is mercenaries who have been everywhere, hired by everyone, and Golgfag is the walking example of that. But he's also an example that has been used by other ogres for their own ends, giving us what is ultimately a super fascinating character who you can use in a variety of ways in your games, or alternatively, can easily pick up for Warhammer Total War when it pops out very soon with a new DLC pack, which we're all looking forward to arriving. So yeah, that was a fun one. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, it should be pretty exciting. Yeah, funny enough, for how old of a character he is, there's surprisingly little dedicated writing to him, like lore-wise. But he also simultaneously, unlike some characters that don't have a lot of writing, has enough where you could say he could literally show up anywhere and could literally do almost anything, and it's completely fine, which is fascinating. Yeah, very unique.
If you want to look at a single character that represents a bridge between old Warhammer and new, that represents a bridge between every faction in Warhammer, this is it. He is the core character that can be anywhere and can also fit into almost any edition of Warhammer, almost unchanged. The Golgfag Maneater that we have at the end is almost identical to the Golgfag Mercenary Captain that we had at the beginning. The only difference is that they've added extra lore. He still has wandered around the Northern Waste. He still wandered around Tilia, the Old World, and then all the new additions they added with Ulthuan and elsewhere. He pretty much is the bridge character that has seen every edition of Warhammer and seen every corner that Warhammer has to offer.
Yep. And with that, thank you all so much for joining us. Just a reminder, we will be back officially, unless something comes up, which it might, but more than likely, we will be live this Wednesday for the Council of 13 tier list stream. The lobby's already up for that. The next regular Lorebeards Sunday stream will be next week on the Loremaster of Sotek channel, and then that following Wednesday will be on Andy's channel, and yada yada yada.
And also worth noting that this Wednesday will also hopefully, assuming that Wednesday goes on, be popping up yet another poll for what we'll be doing for the Lorebeards afterwards, to make sure that we get ahead of ourselves so we can get 2 weeks ahead, which we currently aren't. We're playing catch up at the moment. So after this stream, we'll be popping up a poll, which will be on my channel, as I recall. So that we'll be popping up a poll on my channel, and then hopefully on the Wednesday we'll be popping up a poll over on Sotek's channel, assuming that it all goes according to plan.
Ronald,
fearless.
Thank you all. Enjoy the trailer, which is going to come out on Tuesday. We're all very excited for that. And with that, we'll see y'all.
Yo, bye-bye.
Bye.